You wake before the sun fully decides whether it wants to rise over London, and for a moment you feel the familiar weight of another day pressing against your ribs. The good news? You woke up. Statistically, that already puts you ahead. The city around you, once a restless creature of carts, hoofbeats, shouts, bells, and gossip, now greets the morning with a silence so unnatural it feels like holding your breath. London should be stirring by now. A place with nearly 460,000 people is not supposed to sound like a countryside chapel at dawn. But in the summer of 1665, it does. The plague has woven itself through the city quietly, thoroughly, and without hurry, as if strolling through neighbourhoods with morbid curiosity. By the time you open your eyes this morning, it has killed officially 68,595 people, and likely closer to 100,000, about 1/5 of everyone who once filled London's streets, taverns, markets, and arguments. You don't need the weekly bills of mortality in your hand to feel the weight of that number. The silence already tells you more than paper ever could. Your home, usually a cocoon of predictable sound, is strangely still. No one whispers in the next room. No footsteps cross the floorboards. Even the rats, who should be conducting their nightly shift change, seem less enthusiastic these days. You rise slowly, aware of how every movement feels deliberate now, as if waking up is not the beginning of the day, but a small victory against it. The city is marked by a quiet that presses against the windows, thick, almost physical. Silence is not comforting here. It's a symptom. Now, before we step into a single day in plague-stricken London in 1665, take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day you're joining this journey into one of history's darkest moments. Let's continue. You move toward the window, expecting instinctively to hear the rumble of carts heading to market or the clatter of apprentices sweeping workshops clean. Instead, the street appears paused. Only a stray breeze stirs the dust, and even that seems unsure whether it should be here. People used to complain London was too loud. Now you would pay handsomely to hear even one disgruntled vendor yelling about bruised apples. Noise meant life, and life meant neighbours, and neighbours meant the world was still spinning in the right direction. Now you measure safety by the absence of mourning cloth. There's an odd ritual to mornings during the plague. You take inventory of the world before you take inventory of yourself. You study the street first. Are there new marks on the houses, new signs of movement, new hints of trouble? Your eyes scan for anything freshly painted, anything out of place. Even a door slightly ajar carries meaning. A bucket left outside might signify a need for help, a household in trouble, or someone too afraid to open the door again. But your mind is also doing another kind of counting. It remembers who lived across the street 3 months ago. It remembers which families have been quiet too long. It remembers laughter that once floated from windows, and it knows precisely which of those windows have stayed closed week after week. That is the kind of census Londoners now conduct before breakfast. Not who is alive, but who might still be. As you step back from the window, your thoughts drift to the brutal arithmetic that governs life now. Last year, waking up meant chores and errands and worrying about mundane disasters like spilled ale or rainstorms. This year, waking up means acknowledging that thousands of people, thousands, did not share the same fortune. The plague does not strike evenly. Some parishes vanish more quickly than others. Some streets seem untouched until suddenly they aren't. Luck has become a resource, more precious than coin, and far more unpredictable. The air inside your home feels heavy, not necessarily foul, just weighted with the knowledge of everything hovering outside your door. You breathe carefully, not because it helps, but because everyone breathes carefully now. You feel your lungs working, the cold air creeping in, and you find yourself wondering absurd things. What does safety feel like? Was yesterday real? How many days exactly has it been since you last heard a full conversation from the street? Even casual laughter feels like something from a past life. Yet despite the fear, the silence, the uncertainty stitched into the air like a permanent fog, Morning still arrives. Light still crawls across the floor. Your body still insists on being alive. And there is something quietly defiant about standing up and beginning the day in a city where numbers say you shouldn't be here at all. As London slowly wakes, if one can call this waking, you sense the rhythm of survival starting to take shape. People will eventually step out of their homes, glance cautiously at one another, and begin their rituals of avoiding what cannot be seen. But before all of that, there is this, a moment of stillness where you recognize that simply opening your eyes means continuing the story. And soon enough, as morning spreads across the city, you will face the next ritual, one far more dreaded, one that turns survival into arithmetic, checking the weekly death count. Long before you consider food or conversation, or even the weather, there is one object every Londoner dreads encountering at the start of the day, the bill of mortality. It arrives not as a private document slipped discreetly into your hand, but as something far more brazen, sold openly by criers in the streets for a single penny, which is, in your current economy of fear, the worst bargain imaginable. A penny buys you information, yes, but it also buys you anxiety, a new layer of dread, and the unpleasant certainty that your parish is now competing in a morbid contest you never entered. Yet you pay anyway. Everyone does. Not because they want the bill, but because they can't stand not having it. The moment the bills appear, London shifts ever so slightly. Vendors calling out the week's numbers become a strange, grim counterpart to the old sellers who once hawked oranges or ribbons. Now what sells in bulk, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 copies each week, is a list of the dead. Not stories, not rumours, not sermons. Numbers, columns, totals. A ledger of human endings. They're produced by the Worshipful Company of Parish Clerks, a group that once concerned itself with orderly record-keeping and church administration, yet now elevated unintentionally into the city's most influential publishing house. They don't deal in fiction. They don't traffic in hope. They print facts, and facts in this moment are more frightening than any folk tale. When you finally hold the bill in your hand, the texture feels ordinary, almost insultingly so. The ink, the paper, the layout, none of it hints at the gravity of what it contains. The list begins with familiar parishes, laid out neatly, each accompanied by numbers that now carry emotional weight far heavier than arithmetic should ever bear. There is no polite phrasing, no comforting preface, just the cold accounting of another week. Deaths by parish, deaths by cause, and somewhere in the centre of it all the category you try not to look at but always do first, plague. Your eyes trace downward reluctantly. Scanning neighbourhoods you know, neighbourhoods you've walked through, neighbourhoods where friends once lived. Some parishes have low numbers that offer momentary relief. Others have tallies that make your stomach tighten. And then there are the figures so large that your brain stalls for a moment, unable to reconcile the idea that one part of the city could lose so many people in so little time. But nothing prepares you for the week that is now infamous. 19 to 26 September 1665. A single line on the bill marks it forever. 7,165 plague deaths. A number so massive it seems impossible it could occur within a single city, let alone within a single week. Yet there it is, printed in straightforward type, as if it were merely the result of a busy market day rather than the city's most tragic crescendo. Me reading that number is not like receiving information. It is like being struck. Everyone in London knows the bills contain errors. Searchers sometimes misjudge causes. Parish boundaries blur. Some deaths go unrecorded. And yet, despite these imperfections, the bill functions as gospel. It is the closest thing the city has to truth. And in a moment where rumours multiply faster than bacteria, truth, however flawed, becomes a necessity. The bills tell you where the danger is spreading. They tell you which streets you should avoid, which parishes are drowning, and which areas appear, however temporarily, to be surviving. You can pretend not to care. Many do. But most Londoners find themselves staring a little too long at the numbers, tracing patterns, comparing one week to the next, building maps inside their heads. People who never cared about parochial boundaries can now recite them as if preparing for an exam. Some keep their own tally books, others memorize the numbers aloud, as if repetition might offer control. It doesn't. The bill has no interest in making you feel safe. Its job, if it can be said to have one, is simply to reveal what the city is enduring. Some households argue over whether to read the bill at all. Others read it obsessively, clinging to the faint hope that their parish will show improvement, even by a single digit. The idea that fewer people died this week becomes something like optimism. London's standards for hope have lowered dramatically. The way people hold the bill tells its own story. Some clutch it tightly, knuckles white. Others treat it like a dangerous object, holding it delicately between two fingers as if fear might seep through the ink. A few fold it into their pockets quickly, embarrassed by their need to know. And then there are those who read it publicly, announcing numbers to companions with the solemnity of a priest delivering unwelcome scripture. Rumours form around the bill as well. If the printers delay distribution by an hour, some claim the numbers must be worse than expected. If a parish shows sudden improvement, conspiracy whispers stir. Someone hid the real count, someone bribed a searcher, someone misreported. Nothing can be taken at face value anymore, not even information meant to be objective. But still, London reads. Still, London waits. Still, London fears. As you finish scanning this week's bill, an uncomfortable truth settles over you. This document has become the city's emotional thermometer. People adjust their behaviour based on it, whether to visit relatives, whether to leave the city, whether to trust their neighbours. The bill dictates mood, movement, and morale. It is, in every sense, the city's weekly heartbeat, though the rhythm it keeps is one of decline. You fold the paper, more slowly than you intended, and set it aside. Outside, the day has begun in earnest, and you know the bill's contents will echo through every conversation, every errand, every thought. But the day must continue, with or without comfort. And after absorbing the numbers of death, your next decision is a smaller but still significant act of survival, whether to eat. Soon enough, you'll have to face breakfast, if the word breakfast can even be applied to food you no longer taste in a city that no longer feels alive. Breakfast is no longer something you look forward to. It isn't comfort or routine or warmth. It's simply proof that your body still insists on being alive, even when the city around you seems increasingly uninterested in participating. The moment after you set aside the bill of mortality, the familiar question drifts through your mind. Should you eat, or should you listen to the hollow tightness in your stomach that insists food is both necessary and unwelcome? Hunger and nausea have learned to live side by side now, like two tenants forced to share a cramped room. The markets are technically open, at least pieces of them are. Enough sellers remain to form something resembling a morning economy. But nothing feels reliable. Stalls appear and disappear overnight, depending on who survived the week. A baker who sold you bread yesterday may not be seen today, and if they are, they might be wearing a look that suggests sleep has become optional and hope a luxury. People still go to market because they must, but they move like visitors in a place they barely recognise. Every exchange feels cautious, every coin suspect. Even the simple act of buying bread has changed. You once bought a penny loaf without thinking, maybe two if the household was in good spirits. But now, when you lift one, you think immediately of hands that milled the flour, hands that kneaded the dough, hands that wrapped the loaves, hands that handed them to customers before you. You try not to picture those hands touching their faces between tasks, scratching their noses, wiping their foreheads. You try, but your imagination has grown disobedient. Regulations still exist, oddly enough, like echoes of a world that believed order could solve everything. The official weight still stands. A penny loaf should be 9.5 ounces of wheaten bread. Bakers are expected to follow the rule, and some cling to it as proof that the world retains at least one predictable measurement. But standards mean less than they used to. Bread feels lighter, even when the scale insists it hasn't changed. Perhaps it's your trust that's shrinking, not the loaf. Food that once smelled warm and inviting now smells like danger wrapped in crust. Even the aroma of baking, once a comforting sign that the day had properly begun, carries unease. People stand farther apart in market queues, and not merely out of politeness, but because the idea of another person exhaling within arm's reach now feels like an unacceptable gamble. Some wrap cloth around their faces, others carry herbs to sniff as a shield, as if rosemary could negotiate with death on one's behalf. Yet you buy something anyway. Perhaps bread, perhaps a piece of fruit, perhaps nothing more than the smallest portion that allows you to say you tried. Hunger doesn't drive you, necessity does. Your body needs fuel, but your mind questions everything it touches. You take your purchase home with the same hesitation you might reserve for carrying an unknown liquid. You set it down, inspect it, turn it over. Part of you waits for the food to reveal something sinister. It never does, of course, but the imagination no longer cooperates with reason. Like eating has become a strategy rather than a pleasure. You chew slowly, not out of refinement, but because each bite carries a moment of doubt. You swallow because your body insists. You remind yourself that fuel matters, that weakness is its own danger, but nothing tastes right anymore. The plague has done something to the city's collective palate. It has replaced flavour with awareness, and awareness, it turns out, is not delicious. Still, the ritual must continue. You break apart the loaf, estimating its weight more out of habit than concern. The bread is dense, a reminder that bakers cling to regulation even in chaos. You take a bite, and the texture feels sturdy, almost defiant, as if the grain itself is refusing to surrender to fear. There's a strange comfort in that. Bread may not lift your spirits, but it doesn't abandon you either. It does its job. It fills the space that needs filling. You consider the alternative, not eating. Some Londoners choose that path, believing hunger is safer than risking contamination. Others simply lose their appetite, overwhelmed by the daily proximity to grief, uncertainty, and the constant evaluation of symptoms. But refusing food doesn't make the world feel safer. It just makes you weaker, more aware of your body in the wrong ways. Your stomach's protests become louder than your thoughts, and weakness, like fear, can lead you to decisions you'd rather avoid. So, you eat. Slowly, cautiously, imperfectly. The act itself carries meaning, if not satisfaction, at least momentum. Breakfast becomes a small declaration, not of joy or comfort, but of persistence. It tells your body, continue, even when the city whispers the opposite. You force each bite, knowing that nourishment is less about enjoyment now and more about endurance. When the food is gone, you don't feel full in the way you once did. Instead, you feel stabilized, as though you've placed one stone in the foundation of a structure you hope will stand through the day. Breakfast hasn't improved your mood or lifted the fog that hangs over London, but it has secured something more practical, the energy to move, to think, to react. And you'll need that energy, because the moment you step outside your door again, the world will remind you that the plague does not wait for anyone's digestion. As the morning sun climbs higher, you begin to notice details you missed earlier. Details painted not in numbers or food, but in signs on doors. Your next step, whether you plan for it or not, this will bring you face to face with the marks that define the city's fear. Opening your front door in plague-stricken London is no longer a casual act. It is a decision layered with calculation, instinct, and the faint hope that today, of all days, your caution might be enough. The moment your hand touches the latch, you feel the tension coil in your shoulders, as if the city itself is waiting to see what you will do. Stepping outside is not simply stepping outside. It is accepting the gamble that the air, the neighbours, the street, or your own choices might betray you. Exposure is the most obvious threat. Everyone knows it, nobody understands it, and that combination only magnifies the fear. You cannot see plague drifting through the alleyways or lingering on surfaces, but imagination fills the gaps left by science. Every breeze feels suspicious. Every cough, whether heard faintly across the street or echoing inside a nearby home, becomes a warning. You breathe carefully, not because anyone has proven it helps, but because precaution has become second nature. No one trusts the air anymore. No one trusts proximity. No one trusts normal life, because normal life has become the camouflage for danger. But exposure is only the first hazard you weigh. The second is subtler and, in its own way, more unnerving: being noticed. London may be quieter these days, but has not lost its reputation for curiosity. Neighbours who once discussed the price of fish or the latest scandal now observe movement the way a hawk tracks the rustle of grass. People who rarely cared about your schedule suddenly remember the exact hour you left yesterday and compare it to the hour you leave today. It isn't malice. It's survival disguised as vigilance. You open your door slowly, quietly, as if attempting to slip into the world without altering it. But the act itself alters everything. A window across the lane shifts. Someone has looked up. A curtain stirs. Someone has glanced out. You may not see their faces, but you feel them monitoring you. Every household is desperate to know what is happening beyond their walls, and nothing spreads faster than observation. In a city full of locked doors, the few that open become immediate sources of speculation. Even walking down the street carries its own risks. If you pass too close to a house rumoured to be troubled, people may assume you've been inside. If you pause near a door marked by silence rather than paint, suspicion follows like a shadow. Movement has become a statement. Whether you intended it or not, you're signalling where you've been, what you might have touched, and who you might have spoken to. The geography of safety has been rewritten, and the lines between safe and dangerous shift daily. Assumption has become currency. If you turn a corner too quickly, someone may think you are avoiding detection. If you return home later than expected, someone might whisper that you visited an afflicted household. And although no one admits it aloud, the greatest fear is that neighbours may interpret your behaviour as careless, or worse, contagious. Rumours rarely need evidence. They require only a witness with a worried imagination. You walk differently because of this. You keep space not just because you fear others, but because you fear what others might say. You choose routes based on visibility, avoiding alleys that may raise questions or crowds that may increase risk. You carry yourself with the deliberate caution of someone submitting to a test whose rules were never explained. Your steps sound louder than usual on the cobblestones, as if announcing your presence, and for a moment you wish the street were full again. Noise is easier to hide in than silence. Even errands feel dangerous. Buying food, posting a letter, fetching water, every practical action invites scrutiny. You weigh each task. Is it worth being outside for another 15 minutes? Is anyone watching? Does this look essential, or does it look like you are wandering? You notice others making the same calculations. Two people approach each other, slow, recalibrate their trajectory and widen the space between them without exchanging a word. The choreography is awkward, but it is understood. Then there is the most unsettling fear of all: being linked, even accidentally, to an infected household. A wrong step, a wrong stop, a wrong moment of hesitation near the wrong door could spark a chain of assumptions that leads to your own being questioned. And questioning is dangerous. Examiners, searchers, watchmen. They respond to reports quickly now. The threshold between suspicion and action has grown thin. Even innocent movement can be misinterpreted, and misinterpretation carries consequences no one wants to experience. As you continue down the street, you notice how London has become its own silent informer. The city watches you through gaps in shutters and through whispered conversations behind closed doors. It has transformed into a place where privacy is rare, but suspicion is abundant. People long for certainty, and in its absence they rely on observation. Your movement, however small, becomes part of their understanding of the world that day. You walk steadily, pretending the attention doesn't affect you, but it does. Everyone's behaviour has shifted subtly. as though every Londoner is learning how to live under a magnifying glass. The old rhythms of the street, hurrying to work, greeting passers-by, lingering at doorsteps, have vanished. Now the rhythm is simple. Move cautiously, move briefly, move with purpose. A city once defined by its bustle has become a place where stillness feels safer than progress. And yet you must continue, because life demands it. Breakfast may have given you energy, but stepping into the world requires another kind of strength. The kind that reminds you your decisions matter, not just to you, but to everyone who sees you. Soon, as you round the next bend, you'll encounter a sight that transforms suspicion into something visible and undeniable. The marks on certain doors, those unmistakable symbols of contamination, wait to confront you. And once you see them, the meaning of movement will change again. You turn the corner, and there it is, the mark that changes the way your stomach feels before your mind catches up. A red cross, a full foot long, slashed across a front door with a thickness that suggests the brush never hesitated. It is not decoration, not a symbol open to interpretation. It is a proclamation, it is a warning, and, in the bluntest terms possible, it is a sentence. Beneath it, painted with the same uncompromising hand, are the words required by law. Lord, have mercy upon us. The message is not poetic, it is not gentle, it is not even a plea, not really. It is an announcement to every passerby that plague has entered this home, settled in, and made itself unwelcome but immovable. There is no mistaking it for anything else. Even from a distance, the red is unmistakable, vivid, aggressive, and fresh enough to catch the morning light in a way that feels almost cruel. The first time you see such a mark, it feels like an intrusion, as though someone has painted fear directly onto the wall of your memory. The 10th time, it settles differently, more like resignation. But no matter how often you encounter it, the sight always stops you. It is impossible to walk past without imagining the moment the brush touched the wood, the official who stood guard, the family inside listening to their freedom being sealed away. The cross may be 1 foot long, but it casts a shadow across the entire street. You slow your pace without realizing it. Everyone does. The mark demands tension. It divides space into before this door and after this door, as if the infection itself has boundaries drawn by paint. Nobody lingers nearby. Even people who have lived on this street all their lives suddenly develop a new interest in the opposite wall, or the sky, or the cobblestones. Anything to avoid making eye contact with the place where plague sleeps. The cross is painted thickly for a reason. It is meant to be unmistakable, visible even to those who claim poor eyesight or convenient distraction. And it works. One red mark turns a familiar street into a chart of dread. 2 marks turn it into a corridor of caution. 3 or more begin to look like a map of battle lines, except the enemy is invisible and advances without negotiating. You notice how the painted words, Lord have mercy upon us, don't specify who us refers to. The family, the neighbours, the city, all of them, none of them. It's a phrase that grows heavier the longer you consider it, a request that acknowledges the limits of human intervention. Some households add a small cloth at the window, or leave a bucket outside to signal need, but nothing feels as absolute as the cross itself. As you continue walking, you see another mark and another further down, where a pattern begins to form, not just of which homes are afflicted, but of how entire streets rearrange themselves around these symbols. Children no longer run freely here. Dogs trot past with unusual silence, as if they too understand the shift. Conversations between neighbours grow shorter, careful not to drift too close to marked doors. The cross becomes a border, not drawn on maps, but etched onto daily behaviour. It's not only the infected household that suffers the consequences. The entire street feels the change. Deliveries slow or stop entirely. Friends avoid visiting even the unmarked homes nearby. People cross the street not out of courtesy but survival instinct. The social life of the lane dissolves overnight, replaced by glances that last just long enough to acknowledge danger, then look away. paint has become policy. A brushstroke has become a barrier, and the effect is immediate. The city may lack advanced medical understanding, but it knows the power of symbols. A cross on a door achieves what sermons, warnings, and watchmen cannot. It freezes the ordinary. It stops strangers in their tracks. It forces every resident to acknowledge the presence of plague not as rumour, not as distant statistics, but as a mark visible from 30 paces away. The more you walk, the more you realise how these crosses form a kind of unofficial map, one updated daily, not by cartographers but by fear. Streets that once felt lively now resemble diagrams of contagion. You begin to develop new mental routes based on where the marks appear. A block you walked every day without thought now becomes one you avoid by instinct. A shortcut becomes a detour. A familiar path becomes an emotional calculation, and yet, despite their enormity, the painted marks also tell quieter, more human stories. You think of the people behind those doors, families listening for footsteps outside, wondering who has passed, who has noticed, who will help, and who will keep their distance forever. The cross is a marker of illness, yes, but it is also a declaration of isolation. A household becomes a world unto itself, sealed not by locks alone, but by public awareness. You move on, heart thudding, not because you are close enough to be endangered, but because you are close enough to understand. The red crosses do not merely warn, they reshape the city, redraw social lines, and announce the presence of tragedy with an honesty too sharp to ignore. And as you continue down the street, you're still absorbing the sight of these painted boundaries, you become aware that the people inside are not the only ones watched. To manage plague, the city relies on more than paint. It relies on presence, on guards who stand by these marked doors, enforcing the rules that keep the sick in and the healthy out. And soon you will see them too, waiting in silence beside the symbol that defines their daily work. If the Red Cross announces a household's fate, the watchmen enforce it. You notice one the moment you approach the next marked door, a man leaning against the wall, half alert, half weary, holding the kind of posture that suggests he's been awake far longer than he intended. And this is just the day watch. He's assigned to remain here until 10 at night, when another man will take his place until 6 in the morning. And between the two of them, they make sure no one leaves and no one enters, not without permission, not without scrutiny, and definitely not without consequence. Their job is simple in description and brutal in practice. They are, quite literally, human locks. When households are shut in, watchmen hold the keys, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but physically. If someone inside needs food, medicine, or even news, the watchman can fetch it. If someone inside tries to sneak out, he is responsible for stopping them. The city may not fully understand contagion, but it understands enforcement, and watchmen have become the boundary line between public order and panic. You watch one as he shifts his weight from foot to foot. He's not a figure of authority in the traditional sense. He wears no elegant uniform, carries no polished badge, wields no ceremonial staff. What he has is presence, an inconvenient, immovable presence, and in plague-time London, presence has power. Even standing silently, he transforms the street, reshaping behaviour with little more than a sideways glance. But for all the responsibility thrust upon watchmen, they are neither well-trained nor well-paid. Their wages are modest, unreliable, and often delayed. Many took the job because they needed coin more desperately than they feared the plague. Some were assigned the duty as punishment, others because they lacked better opportunities. A few do the work with grim determination, convinced they are protecting the city. Most, however, perform their tasks with the weary pragmatism of men trapped in obligation. You notice the exhaustion first. The day watch looks like he has forgotten what a full night's sleep feels like. His eyes track movement automatically, as if trained by repetition rather than discipline. The night watch, you've been told, fares even worse, standing guard through dark hours where every cough from inside the house, and every distant footstep outside becomes a question with no satisfying answer. They are not allowed to abandon their posts, not for food, not for comfort, and certainly not for fear. The rotating shifts leave little time for rest, and when they do rest, it is rarely restful. Their fatigue is dangerous not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. A tired watchman may miss movement at a door. A hungry one may be tempted by a bribe, and bribes are not hypothetical. People confined inside their homes, desperate for freedom, will offer what they can. A handful of coins, a promise of repayment, a valuable item slipped quietly into a palm. The temptation is real, and the city knows it. Rumours circulate constantly. Stories of watchmen who unlocked doors for a price, who looked the other way when someone slipped into an alley, who abandoned their post when fear outweighed duty. Yet for every corrupt watchman, there are others who cling to the rules as though their own lives depend on them. Perhaps they do. A watchman who lets someone escape risks more than reprimand. He risks blame, public anger, and punishment. And so some enforce the rules with grim strictness, unmoved by tears or pleas. They lock doors without hesitation, take the keys without apology, and refuse every request for mercy they believe might compromise their task. It is little wonder, then, that watchmen are resented. They stand between households and the world outside, between fear and freedom, between sickness and the illusion of normalcy. People whisper about them with a mixture of distrust and dependence. You cannot go into an infected house without one present, but you also cannot leave if he decides you should not. They are simultaneously guardians and jailers, protectors and obstacles. Everyone understands their importance. Almost no one likes them. As you walk past, the watchman meets your eyes for a brief moment. His expression is unreadable, a blend of vigilance and resignation. You sense that he has seen more suffering than he will ever voice. He knows the sounds families make behind shut doors. He knows when silence has replaced those sounds. He knows the weight of the key he carries and the responsibility that comes with it. And he knows that in another week, another shift, another unlucky assignment, he could be guarding a door belonging to someone he once knew. You continue on, feeling the tension of his gaze linger behind you. Watchmen are stationed everywhere now, like punctuation marks in the fractured sentences that make up London streets. Their presence tells you which houses are sealed, which families are suffering, and which corners of the city should be avoided. But the watchman you just passed, weary though he is, marks only one part of the city's response to plague. There are others whose work brings them even closer to danger. Others who enter infected homes, who tend to the dying, who perform tasks no one envies. And soon enough. As you continue your path through the unsettled streets, you will meet them too. You haven't taken more than a few steps beyond the watchman before you feel the weight of what his presence truly means. A marked door is dreadful enough, but the sealing of a household, the shutting up of an entire family behind wooden boards and iron-fastened locks, casts a darker, more suffocating shadow across the street. Quarantine, as practised in 1665, was not a medical measure so much as a civic sentence. If someone fell ill inside a home, everyone in that house was confined, regardless of age, health, or innocence. One person's fever became every person's prison. The logic behind it seems simple from a distance. Contain the sickness by containing the household. But step closer, and the simplicity evaporates. Once the door is shut, its inhabitants face a new and smaller world, a world defined by the walls of their dwelling, the air they share, and the unpredictable hours ahead. Neighbours speak of shutting up in practical terms, as if closing a door could also close off the spreading fear, but for those inside, the experience is something else entirely, claustrophobic, disorienting, and filled with dread that grows heavier with every passing hour. Imagine the moment it happens. A searcher declares a member of the household infected. The news is delivered not softly but with official weight. The order is made, boards go up, the key changes hands. The watchman steps forward to begin his vigil, and just like that, A home becomes a sealed box in which time continues but the world does not. The door that once opened to errands, gossip, customers, church bells, deliveries, arguments, and sunlight now opens to nothing at all. Inside such a house, the first enemy is uncertainty. No one knows how long the confinement will last. The city's rules offer vague durations, but sickness does not obey timetables. Hours stretch, days blur. Family members struggle to separate the monotony of waiting from the dread of possibility. If the ill person worsens, everyone hears it. If the ill person improves, no one trusts it. The walls hold all sounds, and none of them are comforting. Food becomes an immediate problem. Deliveries are allowed, but they depend on the watchman's willingness to fetch what is needed, and willingness is not a reliable currency. Some watchmen oblige quickly enough. Others grow complacent, exhausted, or resentful. A request for bread may take hours. A request for medicine might not be fulfilled at all. Families ration what they have, stretching meals into fragments, counting pieces of dried fish or crumbs of bread, as if calculating how long hope can endure. Hunger becomes a constant companion, not starvation, but the slow erosion of nourishment that makes every task heavier and every fear sharper. Water, too, becomes a challenge, for while wells and communal pumps still exist outside, those inside cannot reach them. Buckets must be passed through the door briefly or left outside for the watchman to fill. Even that exchange feels risky. A moment of opening the door, just an inch, carries tension on both sides. The household wonders, will we breathe something we shouldn't? The watchman wonders, will someone try to slip past? Both hold their breath, literally and figuratively. Yet it is not only the struggle for necessities that transforms confinement into punishment. It is the forced intimacy with sickness. Families have no option to distance themselves. A coughing child is a danger to the mother who holds her, a feverish husband a risk to the wife who wipes his brow. The younger members listen to the breathing of the older, counting pauses with rising fear. The stronger try to help the weaker, but they cannot avoid the air they share, nor the knowledge that they are trapped with it. Every family becomes a reluctant unit of caregivers, patients, and potential victims. Unsurprisingly, this creates powerful incentives to hide symptoms. A slight headache becomes a secret. A warm forehead becomes a prayer. A rash is explained away. A cough is swallowed before it escapes. People know that acknowledging the first signs means inviting the boards, the watchman, the confinement. Denial feels safer than declaration. Some families manage to conceal sickness for days, even weeks. Others hesitate too long, and the illness announces itself violently. But in a world where reporting symptoms guarantees confinement for everyone, secrecy becomes a survival strategy, however misguided. The emotional strain of confinement fractures households in ways the city does not see. Arguments flare quickly, over food, over chores, over pessimism, over hope. Sleep becomes irregular, dreams anxious. Children sense the tension and cling more tightly. Adults speak in whispers, as though raising their voices might anger the illness or change their fate. Everyone listens for changes in the sick person's condition, for footsteps of the watchman, for voices in the street. Sounds from outside take on outsized meanings, a passing cart, a distant cry, or even the wind rattling shutters. Everything feels like a sign, and yet, for all its cruelty, the shutting up of houses continues, endorsed by city officials who believe it necessary. To the authorities, the household is a unit to contain. To the neighbours, it is a warning. But to those inside, it is a test, one that not every family passes. Some emerge weeks later, pale and shaken but alive. Others never reopen their doors at all. As you walk past another sealed house, the boards secured tightly and the street around it unnaturally still, you realise how many private tragedies unfold behind wooden planks and fading paint. You cannot see the fear inside, nor the hunger, nor the whispered hopes. But the silence tells you enough. The city has built a system meant to contain sickness, but in doing so it has also contained lives, folding them inward until they become stories no one hears. And the unsettling truth settles over you. Not every house needs a painted cross to feel marked. Some simply need to be shut. And soon, as you continue your path through a city reshaped by confinement, you will encounter the darker side of containment, the nighttime rituals that remove those who do not survive. Night in plague-stricken London is not true darkness. It is a dim, muffled interval in which the city seems to hold its breath, waiting for something it would rather not witness. By day, fear hides beneath errands and whispers and the thin veneer of routine, but at night, fear has sound. It comes rumbling slowly down the street, accompanied by the creaking of wood and the uneven clatter of wheels that have carried too much weight for too many nights in a row. This is the death cart, London's most unwelcome visitor, and yet the one that everyone expects. The decision to remove bodies only after sunset was not coincidental. It was deliberate, built into parish orders and civic planning. Darkness offered a kind of shield, sparing the city from the more visible horrors of plague. No one wanted to see the cart in daylight. No one wanted to watch familiar forms being carried outside. No one wanted to witness the brutal arithmetic of loss unfolding in the full presence of the sun. Night permitted a softer cruelty, one partially hidden from sight, though no less present in sound. The cart itself is a plain thing, functional, heavy, and unmistakable. Its wheels groan under the weight of boards reinforced to hold what is placed upon them. It is guided by men whose faces you rarely see clearly, and perhaps that is kinder for everyone involved. Their work begins when the last traces of twilight fade. Instructions pass quietly between parish officials and the collectors, directing them to the homes where bodies wait to be taken. The operation is more organised than one might expect for such a grim task. Death, in the plague year, requires coordination. Each parish maintains its own routines. Some have specific routes, timed loosely so residents can anticipate when the cart will pass. Others respond to signals from watchmen or designated messengers who knock softly at doors to announce that the collection is beginning. The city may falter in many areas during the plague, but its system for dealing with the dead has become disturbingly efficient. Sorrow has been scheduled, grief assigned a timetable. The most haunting part of this nightly ritual is not the cart itself, but the sound it makes long before it reaches your street. You lie awake sometimes, listening for it without wanting to. The wooden wheels strike uneven stones, creating a rhythm that grows louder as it approaches. It begins as a faint suggestion, perhaps you imagined it, and then becomes unmistakable, a slow roll accompanied by muted footfalls and the occasional murmur of voices. Doors open for mere moments, shadows shift, and then the cart moves on. When the collectors reach a house, the process is swift. The watchman unlocks the door. The family, or what remains of it, steps back. No ceremony is offered. This is not a funeral. It is removal. The body is wrapped, lifted, and placed on the cart with the quiet professionalism of men who have performed this task far too many times. They do not linger. Lingering suggests sentiment, and sentiment slows the work. There are other houses waiting. For the living, the sound triggers an instinctive stillness. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Lanterns are dimmed. Children are ushered away from windows. Even adults avert their eyes, as if glancing directly at the cart might invite misfortune. The entire street becomes a corridor of held breaths. The presence of the cart strips away the small illusions that people use to carry themselves through the day. Illusions of safety, of stability, of temporary reprieve. For a few minutes, everything feels starkly real. Then, just as suddenly as it arrived, the cart continues down the road, and taking its grim burden with it. The street is left in uneasy quiet. Households resume their movements slowly, cautiously, as if waiting to make sure the night has released its grip. Sleep, for those who find it at all, comes fitfully afterward. What makes this nightly ritual particularly chilling is how normalised it has become. People dread the cart, yes, but they also expect it. Even children, once shielded from such realities, now know the sound. The cart has become part of the landscape of the plague year, as routine as the church bell or the distant call of a watchman. Death has not merely increased, it has become operationalised. The collectors themselves move through this routine with a detachment born of necessity. They perform a job others cannot or will not do. Their work is not honoured, nor is it condemned, it simply exists. It is a vital function of a city overwhelmed. It is difficult to imagine how they endure it. Each night they witness scenes no person should see repeatedly. Yet they continue, sustained perhaps by coin, or duty, or the stubborn human instinct to keep doing the task in front of you, even when the task is unbearable. By morning, the streets bear no visible trace of what occurred. The cart is gone. The bodies it carried have been transported to pits or cemeteries, where burial takes place out of sight. But those who heard it pass in the night carry the memory with them. It shapes the silence of breakfast, the tension of midday, the unease of dusk. The city lives each day knowing that, when darkness falls again, the wheels will begin their slow, mournful roll. And as you continue walking through the dim-lit streets, absorbing the echo of last night's passage, you know the rituals of death are not yet finished. The bodies taken by cart do not simply vanish, they are buried under strict rules, at hours chosen to spare London from witnessing too much. And soon, the path of your day will lead you to understand how those burials unfold under the cover of night. If the death cart is the city's nightly announcement of loss, the burial that follows is its quietest secret. Long before the sun rises, or long after it sets, London carries out the most sombre of its plague year rituals. Burials must take place only in the dim margins of the day, before the sky lightens or after it darkens. It is not a matter of preference, but ordinance. The city has decided that grief is best handled when no one can see it. The rule is unyielding. Funerals cannot occur in daylight. The sight of too many bodies lowered into the earth would, officials believe, unsettle the living, encourage panic, and undo what thin sense of order remains. So the work is done when the streets are empty and shadows are long, when the world feels suspended and sound travels farther than it should. Mourning is not permitted. Attendance is not permitted. Even family members must stay behind. Only those charged with the task, the gravediggers, the attendants, the parish representatives, stand present, and even they keep their distance from one another. A grave must be 6 feet deep, not 5, not 6-ish, but 6 full feet, carved firmly into the earth. The depth is a regulation meant to keep the living safe, though no one can say for certain whether it works. It is a measurement repeated so often that it has become ritualistic. 6 feet is where plague victims belong. 6 feet is where contagion ends. 6 feet is the boundary between the living world and the one beneath it. Gravediggers, already exhausted from the relentless pace of death, must follow the rule precisely, no matter how many holes are needed or how few hours remain in the night. The burial grounds reflect the pace of the disease. In some places, neat rows still appear, orderly and deliberate. In others, pits have replaced plots, not out of disrespect but necessity. The ground itself cannot keep up. Earth that once yielded easily now resists, hardened by overuse. Gravediggers speak less and breathe more heavily, their tools wear down, their lanterns burn low. But the work continues, because the bodies continue. You imagine standing at the edge of one of those graves, watching a figure lowered into the ground with no eulogy, no farewell, no hand clasped in solidarity. But you cannot. You're not allowed to be there. The rules forbid it, and the punishments are severe. Anyone caught attending a burial risks imprisonment or worse, the shutting up of their own house. Sorrow, it seems, has become a public hazard. The city has turned mourning into something illicit. This leaves grief in a strange, suspended state. Families who lose someone cannot gather to remember them. They cannot accompany them to the churchyard. They cannot watch the earth being returned to place. They cannot stand together, shoulder to comfort one another. Instead, they grieve behind closed doors, quietly, privately, sometimes in complete silence. Then words that would once have been spoken aloud are now whispered in the darkness or held inside until they sour into something heavier. A mother might press her face into a pillow rather than cry openly, out of fear that a wail might draw attention. A husband might sit at a table long after the candle has burned down, staring at a chair that is no longer filled. Children may ask questions their parents cannot answer, and in the house next door similar scenes unfold. The entire city becomes a tapestry of muted sorrow, each home carrying a quiet ache that cannot be shared. The absence of mourning reshapes the way people process death. Without funerals, without processions, without graves they can visit, families lose not only the person they loved, but the rituals that help make loss comprehensible. Death becomes abrupt, anonymous, administrative. Bodies leave the house at night and vanish into the earth before morning. What remains behind is memory, but even memory loses its anchor when the ground itself cannot be approached. You begin to notice how little people speak of the dead now. They speak instead of survival, of fear, of symptoms, of rumours. Speaking of the dead feels dangerous, too heavy, too risky, too capable of unspooling emotions that cannot be expressed safely. And yet, unspoken grief has a way of pressing against the ribs, becoming part of the breath, part of the posture, part of the way people step into the street with a heaviness that was not there before. No one can stop death, but the city has stopped ritual. And ritual, it turns out, is what makes death bearable, so burials remain hidden. Coffins, when they exist at all, are simple, unadorned. Sometimes the bodies are wrapped instead, practical and efficient. Gravediggers lower them quickly, murmuring only what must be said if anything is said at all. They cover the graves with practiced movements, the earth falling in dull, heavy thuds. When the final layer is smoothed, the night continues as though nothing has happened. The living rarely see the burial grounds, yet everyone knows they are filling. They hear whispers of fresh mounds, of lantern light flickering near pit edges, of dirt shifted before dawn. But seeing and knowing are different things, and not seeing, strangely, makes the knowing harder. As you continue through the quiet streets, you carry the solemn understanding that beneath London's surface countless stories have been sealed away, each one lowered silently, each one marked by absence rather than farewell. And before long you will face the strange blend of belief, superstition, and desperate improvisation that people cling to in the absence of ceremony. The belief that bad air, not sorrow, is the true enemy. If grief is silenced in London, smell is amplified. Every street, every house, every passing breeze is judged not by what it looks like, but by what it smells like. The dominant theory of the age, the miasma belief, holds that plague travels through foul air, drifting invisibly through neighbourhoods, slipping under doorways, settling into lungs with malicious patience. Bad air, people insist, carries death. And so Londoners, desperate for any measure of control, turn their war against scent. This battle is not elegant. It is not scientific. It is, at best, creative. But creativity is all people have when understanding fails. You begin to notice it the moment you step into the street. The mingling aromas of herbs, smoke, oils and perfumes drifting from pockets, scarves and doorways. The city smells different now, not merely from the absence of life, but from the presence of so many improvised protections. Everywhere you turn, someone is clutching something fragrant. A pomander, a small perforated sphere filled with spices, dangles from a belt. A woman presses a sprig of rosemary to her nose as she walks. A man carries a handkerchief soaked in vinegar like a knight bearing a shield. Even children, instructed sternly by parents, chew on bitter herbs as though their lives depend on the flavour. Pomanders are especially popular. Fashionable in earlier years as accessories for the affluent, they have now become the city's unofficial defensive weapon. People pack them with cloves, ambergris, myrrh, cinnamon, anything believed capable of overpowering the stench of sickness. Some hang them from their necks, others clutch them tightly, pressing them against their faces whenever they pass a marked door. The wealthy carry ornate silver ones. The poor settle for cloth bundles tied with string. Scent does not distinguish by class. Fear does not either. Then there are the herbs: mint, sage, lavender, wormwood, each with its own whispered reputation. The market sellers who remain open do brisk business in anything that smells sharp, fresh, or aggressively botanical. Households burn handfuls of herbs in small pots, letting the smoke drift through rooms in an attempt to cleanse the air. Those indoors breathe carefully as the fumes fill the space, convinced that if death enters through the nose, salvation must as well. Of all the olfactory defences, smoke is the most dramatic. Some families burn bundles of aromatic wood, filling rooms so heavily that breathing feels like inhaling through a curtain. Others hold small censers as they walk, trailing wisps of fragrant smoke behind them like uncertain priests. The logic is simple. If plague rides the air, then change the air. Transform it. Flood it with something stronger. Perfumes also make their appearance, but not in the gentle, fashionable way they once did. People dab strong oils on their wrists, necks, and handkerchiefs, hoping the heaviness of the scent will counterbalance any invisible threat. Sometimes the effect is overwhelming, an assault of clashing fragrances that would be comical if it weren't so desperate. Streets become a strange combination of incense: floral sweetness, wood smoke, and sweat. London smells wounded, but also combative. Among these methods, one stands out for both its popularity and its peculiarity: tobacco. Smoking it, chewing it, stuffing its leaves into pockets, it has become a near universal reflex. And for this trend, you can thank people like Samuel Pepys, who famously admitted to chewing a roll of tobacco after passing several houses marked with red crosses. The act was impulsive, driven by fear rather than habit. But the story spread, and soon everyone decided that if London's chronicler found comfort in tobacco, then perhaps tobacco could keep plague at bay. Men walk the streets puffing on pipes as though creating a protective fog. Boys imitate them, though their coughing suggests the cure may be worse than the imagined threat. Some even tuck dried tobacco leaves into the mouth, enduring the bitterness in the belief that unpleasant tastes signal greater protection. There is no consistency in how people use it. There is only determination. And beneath all these scents lies a deeper truth. People cling to smell because smell is something they can control. They cannot stop the plague. They cannot understand it. They cannot predict where it will strike next. But they can fill their homes with rosemary, wear pomanders that jingle softly with every step, and inhale tobacco smoke with the solemnity of ritual. Against an invisible enemy, anything tangible feels empowering. Yet even as London wraps itself in clouds of protective aromas, the city remains tense. People smell the air before they breathe it. They pause before entering narrow alleys, are sniffing for warning signs. They hold herbs beneath their noses when passing strangers, suspicion masked as precaution. Scent becomes both shield and prophecy. Walking through these perfumed streets, you sense the contradiction. The air smells alive, busy, filled with effort. But beneath it lies the constant reminder that the city is fighting not a stench, but a sickness. All these fragrances are attempts to reshape fear into something manageable. Each pomander, each herb bundle, each puff of smoke represents hope pressed into tangible form. But scent, no matter how strong, cannot stop what the city does not understand. And as you continue deeper into London, moving past the drifting smells and the anxious rituals attached to them, you will find another group whose role in the plague is unavoidable. While everyone else tries to keep death at distance, these people walk directly into the homes where it resides. In any other year, a doctor's arrival at your door might signal reassurance, a trained mind stepping into uncertainty with knowledge and remedies. But in plague-stricken London, the very sight of a physician can make your heart seize for an entirely different reason. A doctor's presence means that sickness has already crossed your threshold. And even more unsettling is the fact that physicians themselves do not fully understand what they are fighting. In 1665, medicine stands somewhere between courage and confusion, its practitioners divided between those who stay, those who flee, and those who muddle through with more confidence than clarity. Many physicians, especially the wealthier, of better connected ones, leave the city at the first whisper of rising deaths. Their absence does not go unnoticed. People grumble that those with the most education also have the quickest feet. To some, their departure feels like betrayal. To others, it merely confirms what everyone secretly suspects. Doctors are just as frightened as the patients they once treated. There are stories of entire practices shuttered overnight, of apothecaries vanishing without leaving even a note behind, of physicians who advise their patients to keep calm in the morning and pack their belongings by nightfall. But not all flee. A handful remain, not because they understand the plague, but because they believe abandoning the sick would stain their reputation, their conscience, or both. Among them is Nathaniel Hodges, one of the few documented physicians who continues to work amid the city's rising deaths. He records symptoms, observes patterns, and does what he can to treat the afflicted. His notes, written with clinical precision, later become valuable historical accounts. But at the time, he is simply another man navigating a mystery, doing so with steadiness where many others retreat. The treatments available to doctors in 1665 are a combination of inherited tradition, hopeful improvisation, and grim imagination. Bloodletting remains popular, the belief being that removing bad humours can rebalance a body overwhelmed by disease. Leeches, knives, and cups find their way into the physician's toolkit, used with the kind of solemn determination that suggests the act must work because it looks serious. Once the blood is drained, the patient is often told to rest, an instruction that feels insultingly obvious, given the circumstances. Then there is the lancing of buboes, the swollen, painful lumps that form under the arms, on the neck or in the groin, are seen as pockets of poison that must be released. Physicians heat their instruments, steady their hands, and puncture the swellings, hoping the discharge will lessen the fever. The procedure is excruciating, often horrifying, and occasionally followed by brief moments of relief. Sometimes patients do improve afterward, but just as often, nothing changes. The buboes are unpredictable enemies, and the doctors who face them know it. Purging is another favoured tactic. If illness is imagined as an invader hiding within the body, then forcing that body to expel everything it contains seems, to physicians of the age, a sensible strategy. Patients are given concoctions that induce vomiting or diarrhea, leaving them weak but theoretically cleansed. Whether the sickness is expelled or merely the patient's strength is another matter entirely. To the ordinary Londoner, these treatments can appear both impressive and terrifying. Doctors enter homes with confidence, but confidence is not the same as certainty. Their remedies sometimes work, often fail, and occasionally make matters worse. Some households welcome physicians with desperate relief. Others avoid calling them at all, fearing the visit may doom the patient, confirm the illness, or trigger the dreaded shutting up of the house. Trust becomes complicated. A doctor may save a life on Tuesday and be blamed for a death on Thursday. People whisper about practitioners who carry sickness with them from house to house, spreading the very thing they claim to cure. Others mutter that doctors experiment too freely, trying new methods on the desperate because no one else will volunteer. And yet, despite all this suspicion, people continue to send for them. Confusion does not erase the need for hope. You notice, too, that physicians walk differently now. They carry themselves with a mixture of weariness and duty, aware that every home they visit could expose them, that every patient could become a story they carry into the next house. Some wear protective coverings, thick coats, gloves, masks filled with herbs. more to calm their own nerves than because the measures truly work. Many simply rely on prayer, good fortune, or the belief that their position grants them some invisible shield. Their presence in the streets is rare but unmistakable. They move quickly, with purpose, avoiding unnecessary conversation. When they step into a home, neighbours watch closely. When they leave, people hold their breath, wondering what conclusion the doctor reached inside. Did he administer a purge? Did he lance a bubo? Did he say nothing at all? His expression, however slight, becomes the news that circulates down the street within hours. A doctor who remains in London during the plague walks a tightrope. On one side is duty, on the other, fear. Beneath him lies confusion so deep that even the most learned physicians cannot see a clear path. They act because inaction feels worse. They treat because doing nothing would be unbearable. But they know, though they seldom say it aloud, that the plague does not play by the rules of their training. As you move away from the doctor's silhouette disappearing into another darkened doorway, you cannot help but feel both respect and unease. London's physicians stand as symbols of an imperfect hope, trusted when there is no alternative, feared because they represent the thin line between effort and inevitability. And as the sick wait behind shuttered doors, another group moves through the city with far less recognition, yet far more contact with the dead. Soon, your path will lead you to the women whose work is closest to danger, closest to disease, and closest to truths the city does not want to see. In a city where most people flinch at the faintest hint of sickness, there are women who walk straight into the rooms everyone else avoids. They do not stride in with the authority of physicians or the keys of watchmen. They enter with aprons, cloths, and the quiet resignation of those who know their work is necessary, thankless, and perilous. These are the nurses and the searchers, the women whose hands, more than anyone's, meet the plague without permission to hesitate. Searchers are the shadow archivists of London's mortality. When someone dies, they are the ones called to determine the cause, their assessments feeding directly into the bills of mortality that shape the city's understanding of the plague's advance. They are rarely young. The job falls most often to older women, widows, or those with no other means to earn a living. The work pays little, barely enough to cover necessities, and certainly not enough to compensate for the danger. Yet they accept the task. He's stepping into cramped rooms where bodies lie still, and the living watch anxiously from corners. Their role requires close contact with the dead, closer than anyone wishes to imagine. They observe buboes, check for telltale markings, note the condition of the skin, the stillness of the limbs. Sometimes they must rely on incomplete or conflicting accounts from the family, who may fear the consequences of reporting plague. Sometimes they must trust their own instincts, sharpened by repeated exposure to the worst sights a city can produce. Their verdicts carry weight. A plague designation means more than a recorded death. It can trigger the shutting up of a household, the suspicion of neighbours, the dread of everyone nearby. Not everyone trusts them. The stigma surrounding searchers follows them through the streets. People step aside not only because they fear contagion, but because they cannot shake the thought that anyone who spends so much time with the dead must carry something of death with them. Rumours grow easily in a frightened city, and these women often become targets, accused of dishonesty if their reports seem inconsistent, accused of carelessness if sickness spreads nearby, accused even of corruption if someone believes they accepted coin to declare a death something other than plague. Truth matters little compared to fear. Yet for all the suspicion they endure, searchers continue their work. At dawn they walk to parishes still half asleep. At dusk they stand in narrow doorways while families hold trembling lamps. Their presence shapes the city's understanding of the epidemic, even as the public avoids looking them directly in the eyes. They are indispensable and unwanted, essential and shunned. Nurses operate in a different but equally dangerous sphere. While searchers examine the dead, nurses confront the living who hover between survival and collapse. They step into fevered rooms where the air hangs heavy with breath and dread. Their tasks are endless. cooling brows, cleaning sores, helping patients drink, changing linens soaked with sweat. They stay close to the sick in the final hours, bearing witness to suffering that most people now fear too much to watch. The work is relentless. Nurses enter homes already thick with worry and remain long after exhaustion sets in. They sit through long nights of delirious muttering, sudden silence, or the sharp gasps that warn the end is near. They offer what comfort they can, and though comfort has limited reach in a house where everyone knows what outcome is most likely. Their presence can be a balm, but it can also be a reminder that the family is losing control of what happens beneath their roof. Those who become nurses do not do so for prestige. The pay is poor, the risk immense. Some accept the job out of necessity, others take it on out of duty or resilience. Many do it quietly because someone must. Their bravery often goes unspoken, overshadowed by fear. Households may depend on them one day and avoid them the next, afraid that prolonged proximity to sickness has made them vessels of contagion. The stigma follows nurses as persistently as it does searchers. People whisper about women who move too comfortably between sick rooms. They speak suspiciously of those who survive exposure time and time again, as if endurance itself is a sign of something unnatural. Some accuse nurses of harbouring the disease, others of withholding their own symptoms to keep earning a wage. These accusations, grounded more in terror than truth, isolate the women who perform the city's most compassionate labour, and yet their presence remains indispensable. Without nurses, the sick would be left entirely to their families already overwhelmed, frightened, and often unprepared for the practical realities of caring for someone in crisis. Nurses ease burdens no one else dares touch. Their steady hands keep water cups from shaking, reposition fevered bodies in beds too hard and too narrow, and remain in the room after even the bravest relatives retreat. Their work does not end with death. They prepare the body, drawing sheets carefully over still faces, tidying garments, closing shutters. They wait with the deceased until the watchman arrives, then retreat into the night to rest for a few hours, if rest is possible, before entering another home where uncertainty hangs as thick as the fevered air. Searchers and nurses form the quiet backbone of plague-time London, though few thank them, and even fewer understand the burdens they carry. They are present at the moments others flee from, the first signs of illness, the final breath, the confirmation of death. They witness the city's suffering not in theory, but in rooms where the air smells of fear and the walls tremble with whispered prayers. As you continue your slow walk along the street, passing houses where women like these have already stood, another thought takes hold. For every person who tends to the sick, there are many more who try to prevent sickness from reaching them at all, and soon you will step into the uneasy space where commerce falters, where markets struggle, and where the necessities of life become as unpredictable as the illness itself. Morning in London still brings activity, but it is thinner now, like fabric stretched too far. The markets open because they must, because even in a city overwhelmed by plague, people still need bread, meat, vegetables, and the simple comfort of knowing something essential continues. But anyone stepping into the marketplace can feel that something is missing. The crowd is not a crowd anymore. The stalls are not all filled. Sellers who stood proudly behind their tables a week ago have vanished without notice. Illness does not send farewell messages. The market square holds an uneasy energy. It is one of the few places where people still gather, yet gathering itself feels wrong. Everyone keeps a careful distance, moving with the awkward choreography of those who understand that proximity carries risk. Goods are displayed, but their presence feels temporary, as though they could disappear mid-morning if a merchant suddenly feels faint. No one trusts constancy anymore, least of all here. Supply has become fragile. Some mornings bring a reasonable assortment of goods. Vegetables from the countryside, bread from smaller bakeries, fish hurried in from the riverbanks. Other mornings offer almost nothing. A single cart of wilted greens, a few loaves that sell within minutes, a pot of broth ladled into jars with a kind of haste that suggests the cook has other concerns. The shortages do not follow a pattern the public can see. They depend on who survived the night, who dared travel, and who hasn't abandoned their livelihood yet. Sellers try to hold a sense of routine, but their attempts often falter. A butcher may begin his day sharpening knives and stacking cuts of meat, before abruptly stepping away, leaving his stall unattended as he coughs into a cloth. A fruit seller might arrive with a basket that once overflowed, but now carries only enough produce to suggest she picked what she could in a hurry, perhaps too anxious to linger in her orchard. Some stalls are manned by apprentices or distant relatives, the true owner having succumbed days earlier. Others remain closed, their wooden shutters locked, their awnings folded tightly as if trying to conceal whatever absence lies behind them. Prices shift constantly. Not because of greed, though suspicion always whispers that possibility, but because uncertainty infects every part of the economy. A loaf of bread might cost a familiar amount one day and a noticeably higher amount the next. The price of a fish can double if only a few fishermen arrive at market. Even basic vegetables reflect the volatility. A cabbage might feel more like a gamble than a purchase. There is no fixed inflation rate, no official record of the fluctuations. There is only the daily negotiation between scarcity and survival. And then there is the fear inherent in the act of buying itself. Coin has become suspect. People exchange money with the same caution one might reserve for handling hot coals. They drop coins into outstretched hands instead of placing them directly. They avoid brushing fingers. Some sellers insist customers leave payment on a wooden tray, then wait before picking it up, as though time alone can cleanse metal. Others wrap coins in scraps of cloth before slipping them into their pouches, unwilling to let the copper touch their skin. Goods invite distrust as well. A head of lettuce may look crisp and inviting, but the questions it triggers swirl faster than appetite. Who touched this before me? How many hands lifted it, sorted it, weighed it? What if one of those hands trembled with fever? Customers sometimes stand staring at produce with a hesitation that would have seemed absurd just a year earlier. They turn fruits over, sniff them, inspect them from angles that imply they are searching for invisible threats. And although no one openly admits it, many wash their purchases excessively at home, boiling what can be boiled, peeling what can be peeled, scrubbing what cannot be cleansed in any meaningful scientific sense. The market's soundscape reflects the tension. Conversations are brief, transactional, stripped of the warmth once found in bargaining. Laughter is rare, jokes rarer. Vendors call out their goods, but their voices lack their former bravado. Buyers speak softly, almost guiltily, as if acutely aware that even exchanging words risks exchanging air. Children who accompany their parents are told not to touch anything. Their small hands hover in front of baskets, yearning for curiosity, restrained by whispered warnings. Despite all this, the market remains one of the city's few functioning arteries. Without it, hunger would become another plague entirely. People rely on these fractured exchanges to sustain their households, to provide a brief reminder that commerce, though damaged, still exists. The act of buying food becomes a small but meaningful statement. Life is still in motion. Yet beneath the surface of activity lies a quiet fear that the market could collapse entirely. If more sellers fall ill, if transportation routes falter, if rumours continue to scare merchants away, the fragile network that keeps food circulating may fracture. And everyone knows that if the market fails, the city will face a crisis beyond sickness. You leave the square with whatever you managed to purchase, perhaps less than you hoped for, but enough for now. The weight of the goods in your arms is steadier than the weight of the thoughts they provoke. Each item carries a story you did not witness, the hands that picked it, the risks taken to bring it to market, the invisible chain connecting countryside fields to urban tables. That chain feels more fragile every day. As you move farther from the square, your thoughts shift toward another kind of movement, one that does not gather people together but scatters them outward. Not everyone remains in London. For some, flight becomes the next form of survival. And soon, as you leave the market's thinning bustle behind, you will encounter the complicated geography of escape in a city where not everyone has the privilege to run. If the markets reveal how London struggles to feed itself, the roads reveal how London tries, desperately, unevenly, to save itself. In a city where danger hangs in the air, the instinct to flee rises naturally. And many do flee, but not in equal measure, nor with equal success. The plague divides Londoners in countless ways, yet one of the clearest divides is drawn not by illness but by mobility, those who can leave and those who cannot. The first to depart are the ones with the privilege to do so. When plague numbers begin their steady climb, Charles II and his court remove themselves from the city, retreating to safer estates far from crowded streets and infected parishes. The king's flight sets the tone for the season. If the monarch abandons the capital, what hope do ordinary residents have of safety? His absence becomes a kind of signal, a royal confirmation that the danger is real enough to warrant distance. Nobles follow quickly, then merchants, then anyone with enough wealth to afford horses, servants, luggage, and lodging beyond the city limits. Coaches rumble out of London packed with trunks and provisions, their wheels carving deep grooves in the softened roads from overuse. The exodus feels almost ritualistic, those with means disappearing past the gates, leaving behind rows of shuttered townhouses and entire neighbourhoods where curtains no longer move. For the wealthy, escape is not merely a possibility, it is expected. Their country estates, once used for leisurely retreats, now become fortresses of avoidance. Letters later reveal how they pass their time, managing their lands, hosting controlled gatherings, lamenting the news from London while carefully distancing themselves from those who bring it. Some send periodic funds or food to the parishes they left behind, gestures that feel like attempts to ease guilt more than offer tangible help. But while these families move towards safety, the majority of London's population remains exactly where they are. The poor cannot flee. They lack horses, wagons, relatives in the countryside willing to take them in, or even the simple funds to secure lodging. Their world is London, even when London becomes unrecognisable. Escape requires resources they do not have, and the plague does not negotiate payment plans. Even those who try to leave on foot face obstacles long before reaching the city's outskirts. Roadblocks, manned by guards from surrounding towns, restrict entry to anyone suspected of coming from an infected area. Villages, protective of their limited resources and terrified of contagion, bar travellers from approaching their gates. Their signs are posted declaring outsiders unwelcome. Hospitality, once a point of pride among rural communities, transforms into suspicion hardened by fear. Stories circulate of families turned away after days of walking, their meagre belongings clutched in tired hands, begging for shelter. Some collapse on the roadside, some return to London defeated. Others attempt to press farther, hoping to find a village more forgiving, or one too small or too distracted to stop them. But the countryside does not want refugees from the city. They carry, if not the disease itself, the association of it. Road restrictions become as effective at trapping the poor inside London as any set of quarantine boards. The tension between fleeing Londoners and the communities they approach grows with every passing week. Rumours swell with the same speed as infections. The villagers whisper that city folk bring death in their pockets. Travellers claim rural guards beat or threaten those who come too close. Even inns refuse food and lodging to anyone who cannot prove they have been away from the capital long enough to be clean. Proof, of course, is impossible. Fear overrides documentation. Back in London, those who watch their wealthier neighbours depart feel a mixture of envy, resentment, and resignation. Houses that once belonged to influential merchants now stand dark. Windows that once glowed with candlelight offer only emptiness. The absence of the city's upper crust leaves a mark not only socially but structurally. Charitable donations shrink. Businesses falter without their patronage. Neighbourhoods that relied on wealthy households for income lose economic lifelines overnight. But for the poor, and staying is not purely a lack of choice, it also becomes a kind of identity. Those who remain share an unspoken understanding. Survival will be decided here, within the boundaries of the city, among the noise and silence, sickness and resilience. They learn to navigate emptied streets, to rely on neighbours, to move cautiously between the dangers of plague and the dangers of poverty. Escape is an abstract luxury, not a real one. And yet, resentment grows. London becomes a divided world, where absence itself becomes a mark of privilege. Those who remain feel abandoned. Those who leave feel compelled to distance themselves, physically and emotionally, from the misery unfolding behind them. The road between London and the countryside stretches like a moral fault line. Each traveller must decide which side they stand on. As you walk the city's narrow lanes, you see the divide reflected even in conversation. Some residents speak bitterly of those who fled. Others express sympathy, saying they would have done the same if only they could. But everyone understands that departure changes more than geography. It reshapes the balance of the city, leaving behind a population defined increasingly by hardship. And if escape reveals who can leave, it also reveals something darker: who gets blamed. For in a city stripped of its wealthier residents, suspicion must land somewhere. And soon, as fear tightens its grip, you will encounter the uncomfortable truth that in times of crisis, people often turn their attention not towards solutions, but towards scapegoats. When a city cannot fight an invisible enemy, it often turns on the enemies it can see. In plague-stricken London, fear becomes a lens that distorts everything: logic, memory, compassion. People begin searching for causes not in the rats or fleas they don't yet understand, but in one another. And the first to bear the weight of that search are the ones who have the least power to defend themselves: foreigners, beggars, the chronically poor, and anyone who happens to arrive from somewhere else at the wrong time. Whispers start small, carried quietly between neighbours standing several feet apart. Someone claims the sickness grew worse after a group of travellers passed through a parish. Another says a stranger was seen touching door handles with unusual attention. A third insists that the plague must have been brought by outsiders, though no one defines what outside means anymore. The whispers spread faster than facts, shaping public imagination with suspicion rather than truth. Foreigners face the sharpest scrutiny. Their accents, once merely peculiar, now feel ominous to frightened ears. Their clothing, customs, or even unfamiliar gestures become reasons for mistrust. A merchant from the Low Countries, a sailor speaking Portuguese, a cook from France. People who once filled London with commerce and connection now find themselves under a cloud of accusation. Some avoid speaking in public altogether. Others limit their movements to avoid confrontations with residents who look too long and too hard. The city that once welcomed trade and diversity with open hands now folds those hands into fists. Beggars, too, become targets of hostility. Their presence in the streets, unavoidable and constant, unsettles residents who fear both sickness and poverty as twin spectres. Some accuse beggars of spreading disease deliberately, as if desperation were a form of malice. Every cough from someone in torn clothing becomes a threat. Every plea for alms feels like an intrusion into someone's fragile sense of safety. The fact that these individuals have no homes to be shut up in only makes people more wary. A wandering body is unpredictable, and unpredictability terrifies London now. The poor in general become the city's unspoken scapegoat, blamed not for what they have done, but for what they symbolise: vulnerability, exposure, inability to isolate. Rumours spread that entire neighbourhoods suffer because the poor refuse to follow precautions. The truth, that they simply have fewer options, is ignored. Yeah, families living 10 to a room cannot keep distance. Workers cannot stay home when staying home means not eating. But in a city riddled with anxiety, empathy erodes quickly. The poor become caricatures of irresponsibility, a convenient explanation for why the plague continues. Travellers suffer a similar fate. Anyone arriving from outside London, whether from the countryside or across the Channel, is viewed with deep suspicion. Villagers fear Londoners, Londoners fear outsiders, Everyone fears someone. A traveller walking through a market may find themselves followed by narrowed eyes. A person asking for lodging may be refused outright. Even tradesmen who come to deliver goods are treated like possible carriers of misfortune. People begin to avoid inns entirely, afraid they might accidentally breathe the same air as someone from somewhere else. Moral panic fills the void where rational thought might otherwise live. People begin inventing explanations with alarming confidence. Some claim foreigners poison wells. Others say beggars spread contagion intentionally to increase alms. A few insist the plague is punishment sent because the city has tolerated too many strange customs from abroad. No evidence supports any of this, but fear rarely requires evidence. It thrives on volume, not accuracy. Suspicion becomes a currency traded freely and frequently. A glance lasts too long. Suspicious. Someone passes by your door twice in 1 hour. Suspicious. A traveller knocks asking for directions. Deeply suspicious. Even illnesses that look nothing like plague spark paranoia. If a foreigner experiences a fainting spell, someone mutters that it must be a sign. If a beggar collapses from hunger, people retreat as though death were radiating outward from the body. This shift in attitude tears at the fabric of the city as surely as the plague does. Social ties fray. Generosity shrinks. The same Londoners who once would have shared a meal with a stranger or helped a traveller find lodging now walk briskly past, holding their breath and clutching whatever charms or herbs they carry for comfort. Fear has replaced compassion so thoroughly that even brief moments of kindness feel like relics from a forgotten era. And yet, beneath all the suspicion lies a bitter truth. Blame offers false comfort. It gives people something tangible to point at, someone to accuse, someone to watch. It creates the illusion of control, an idea that if the guilty could only be identified and removed, the sickness would stop. But the plague does not care about accents, clothing, or coin. It moves through the city without regard for the categories people impose upon one another. Still, the instinct persists. People cling to scapegoats the way others cling to pomanders or prayers. Fear needs direction, and in the absence of understanding, it finds targets wherever it can. Those who look different, speak differently, or live differently become vessels for the city's terror. As you continue through the uneasy streets, the tension grows almost palpable, a sensation that suspicion hovers in the air as thickly as the imagined miasma people fear. And you realise that when people cannot find certainty in their surroundings, many turn instead to certainty in the divine, hoping faith might offer answers where reason fails. Soon, your path will lead you into the quiet chapels, whispered prayers, and desperate rituals that shape how London tries, in its own trembling way, to negotiate with forces beyond its understanding. When logic falters and remedies fail, people turn instinctively toward whatever remains. In plague-ridden London, what remains is faith, sometimes steady, sometimes trembling, but always present like a low hum beneath the noise of fear. Religion becomes not simply a matter of belief, but a framework for understanding disaster, a tool for interpreting suffering, and, in many cases, the only accessible form of comfort when nothing else feels within reach. The city responds to the plague not only with watchmen and orders, but with proclamations calling for public fasts. These fasts are meant to be collective gestures of remorse and humility, opportunities for Londoners to show God they recognise his displeasure and are ready to amend their ways. Churches announce days when citizens must abstain from food, kneel in prayer, and reflect upon the sins thought to have invited divine punishment. Attendance is encouraged with fervour, though always with the uneasy knowledge that gathering people in one place now carries its own risks. But risk feels secondary to repentance. Fear of death drives people toward the altar, even when fear of contagion tells them to stay home. Inside the chapel, sermons take on tones shaped by the anxieties of the city. Some ministers preach thunderously, insisting the plague is a scourge sent by God to correct moral decline. They warn that vanity, greed, and worldly indulgence have led London astray, and that only sincere repentance will cause the divine hand to withdraw its affliction. These sermons echo through the rafters with the weight of accusation, convincing listeners that their personal failings might somehow be woven into the broader tapestry of suffering. Other ministers adopt gentler tones, offering messages centered on endurance, mercy, and compassion. They speak of the plague not as punishment but as a test, a trial meant to strengthen faith rather than condemn. Congregants lean into these interpretations, grateful for words that soothe rather than scold. Yet even these comforting messages cannot fully erase the worry that disaster has meaning. Yeah, that sickness is a message too loud to ignore. The resulting landscape of belief is uneven and often contradictory. In one parish, a sermon may declare the plague a direct warning from God. In another, it may be framed as a mysterious trial whose reasons lie beyond human understanding. People carry fragments of both interpretations, depending on which one best eases their fear in a given moment. Confusion becomes part of worship, the faithful search for explanations that are both personal and universal, intimate and cosmic, comforting and humbling. Personal guilt narratives flourish in this environment. Individually, people examine their own lives with uncomfortable scrutiny. A harsh word spoken to a neighbour months ago becomes a source of anxiety. A forgotten promise returns with sharp clarity. These small misdeeds swell under the pressure of reflection. Even those who have lived quietly and conscientiously feel compelled to question themselves. What if their lapses, minor, mundane, contributed somehow to divine displeasure? In times of fear, guilt grows quickly, seeking any foothold it can find. Parents worry not only for their children's health, but for their children's souls, encouraging them to pray more earnestly, to speak kindly, to show obedience as though goodness might grant immunity. Spouses watch one another with concern, wondering whether emotional burdens carried in silence are now too heavy to bear alone. People confess privately to ministers, seeking not absolution from plague, but reassurance that their suffering is not punishment targeted specifically at them. Prayer becomes both a communal act and a deeply private one. In homes where families kneel together, the atmosphere shifts. Rooms feel smaller but safer, as though the simple act of bowing heads can create a boundary between the household and the outside world. Candles flicker, illuminating expressions carved by both hope and exhaustion. Words are whispered with the urgency of those who know they have little else to offer. For some, prayer functions like steady breathing, something practiced as a means of calming the mind, even when the heart still races. For others, prayer becomes a form of negotiation. They promise better behaviour, kinder actions, renewed devotion, anything that might persuade the heavens to spare their home. Bargains are whispered into darkness with the timid earnestness of people who cannot help believing someone is listening. Meanwhile, public proclamations declaring days of fasting or collective repentance are read aloud with ceremonial weight. They frame prayer not just as spiritual practice but as civic duty. London, the documents declare, must humble itself. It must turn away from moral failings and toward divine mercy. Even those who waver in their belief participate, not wanting to risk being seen as obstinate during a crisis where social judgment and spiritual anxiety intertwine. In all of this, faith becomes both anchor and pressure. It offers comfort, yes, but it also adds layers of expectation. People ask themselves not only, will we survive this, but also, are we worthy of surviving this? It is a heavy question, yet one that echoes through households just as surely as the passing of the death cart echoes through the streets. Still, faith sustains many in ways no physician or watchman ever could. Where medicine falters, prayer persists. Where explanations fail, ritual steps in. Where fear overwhelms, hope, however small, flickers quietly. And as you continue your walk through London, leaving behind the murmured prayers that drift from windows and the solemn announcements tacked to church doors, you begin to notice another kind of silence taking shape. A silence not of reverence, but of tension. For even as people turn inward for comfort, The strain of constant fear begins to press on their minds in ways that reshape daily life. Soon, your path will lead you deeper into the realm of thought, where the plague alters not only bodies, but the very atmosphere inside people's minds. There is a peculiar kind of suffering that thrives not in sickness, but in the space before sickness, the long trembling hours in which the body feels like an unreliable narrator and every sensation becomes a possible omen. In London during the plague, this waiting becomes its own form of torment. People live not only with fear of the disease, but with fear of the moment the disease might announce itself, quietly at first, then unmistakably. Survival becomes a constant negotiation between vigilance and exhaustion. The day begins, for most, with a simple question. Do I feel normal? And immediately nothing feels normal. You swallow and wonder whether your throat is sore or simply dry. You stretch your limbs and question whether the ache in your shoulder is from sleep or something far more sinister. You rub your forehead, not because it hurts, but because you need confirmation that it doesn't hurt. The mind has become a detective with no real evidence, interrogating a suspect who refuses to answer clearly. Anxiety mimics illness with uncanny ease. A small rise in temperature from sitting too close to a fire becomes a potential fever. A single cough, caused by dust or smoke or simply clearing your throat, feels like the opening line of a tragedy. Even ordinary tiredness, something every Londoner now carries, begins to resemble plague fatigue. The body becomes an ensemble of ambiguous signals, and the mind examines each one as if reading signs from a divine language it cannot translate. People begin listening for symptoms the way others listen for trouble at night. A cough in the house next door sharpens the ears. A faint sneeze from across the room stops conversation. A sudden silence in a household known for noise triggers speculation. Every sound feels loaded with meaning, as though the plague communicates not through words but through subtle disruptions in daily rhythms. Inside homes, the tension becomes palpable. Families watch one another with quiet intensity. If a child rubs their eye too long, a parent wonders if swelling will follow. If a husband clears his throat, a wife glances at his neck, searching for the outline of something that should not be there. Even pets tilt their heads at the unusual stillness, sensing that something in the air has changed, not the disease itself, but the people bracing for it. Body checking evolves into a routine almost as structured as morning prayers. People prod at their lymph nodes with hesitant fingers, feeling for lumps that are never there until they suddenly are. They examine their reflections in poor lighting, tilting their heads to catch shadows that might hide discolorations. Someone notices a small blemish and spends the rest of the evening worrying whether it has grown. Another person touches the same spot so many times that the skin reddens, creating the very sign they feared. Sleep offers little relief. People lie awake, listening to their breathing, counting the seconds between inhalations, wondering whether the tightness in their chest is real or just the weight of dread pressing downward. A shift in bedding becomes the reason for a sudden shiver. A dream becomes an imagined fever. In the darkness, imagination is loud. It speaks in the voice of symptoms you have not yet felt but can already describe with perfect clarity. This psychological burden erodes more than peace of mind. It reshapes behaviour. People avoid movements that might generate suspicion. No one wants to cough in public, even accidentally. If someone feels compelled to clear their throat, they do so into a cloth, quietly, hoping no one hears. A person who stumbles from fatigue might hold themselves unnaturally upright, afraid that even a hint of unsteadiness will cause neighbours to watch them too closely. Waiting becomes the dominant activity of the city. Waiting for news, waiting for death carts, waiting for the bills of mortality, waiting for the next wave of infections, waiting for the telltale heat behind the eyes or the ache in the joints. It is a state of suspended dread, where time moves without offering progress. Each day without symptoms feels like borrowed time. Is each day with a hint of something, anything, feels like the beginning of an inevitable descent. What makes this psychological weight particularly brutal is its invisibility. The city acknowledges sickness, death, fear of contagion, but not the quieter suffering inside the mind. No proclamations address the torment of uncertainty. No prayers promise relief from the constant checking and rechecking of one's own body. People carry this burden alone, sharing it only through strained glances or the occasional confession whispered before sleep. There is also the haunting awareness that symptoms can appear suddenly, overturning hours of careful reassurance. One moment you feel tired but fine. The next, a wave of heat washes through your body and panic follows. The line between health and illness becomes so thin that you begin to distrust every moment of well-being, expecting it to shatter without warning. This internal tension shapes how people move through the city. They walk more slowly, fearfully. They avoid touching surfaces not only because of contamination, but because touching anchors them too firmly in their bodies, reminding them of their vulnerability. Even the slightest pain, caused by a misstep, a poorly adjusted shoe, or the stiffness of a long night, sends ripples of alarm through their thoughts. And as you witness this collective tightening, you realize something profound. The plague attacks minds long before it attacks bodies. It teaches people to fear themselves, to doubt their sensations, to question whether survival is something they can influence or merely endure. The psychological toll becomes a secondary plague, less visible, less discussed, but widely shared. This mental strain affects not just individuals but entire households. Families grow quiet, children watch their parents with widened eyes, and neighbours avoid unnecessary conversation for fear their voices might betray tremors of worry. The city becomes an emotional pressure chamber, the collective anxiety pressing inward. Yet even within this tension, something resembling resilience forms, not through peace of mind, but through persistence. People continue their routines. They speak words of reassurance even when they barely believe them. They breathe, they wait, they hope. And as the day stretches on, the weight of waiting begins to shift from internal fears to the outer world once again. For beyond the threshold of each home lies a city struggling not only with illness, but with a changing economy where work, once predictable, becomes a gamble shaped by risk, necessity, and the relentless presence of death. Soon, you will step into the world of labour, the jobs that must continue, the workers who cannot stop, and the impossible choices they face. There comes a point in every Londoner's day when a single, irritating question pushes its way to the front of the mind. Is this the plague? Or am I simply exhausted, hungry, stressed, or alive in 1665? And tragically, the answer is never obvious. Early symptoms of plague overlap so perfectly with the discomforts of ordinary living that even the healthiest person can spiral into dread after noticing something as minor as a warm forehead or a stiff joint. The plague rarely begins with spectacle. It does not announce itself with dramatic flourishes or unmistakable signs. It tiptoes. It behaves like a bad day wearing a sinister disguise. A mild headache becomes a puzzle. A moment of dizziness after standing too quickly becomes a crisis. People poke at their own necks and wonder whether tenderness is real or just the result of prodding. They touch their chests, trying to determine if the slight tightness is illness or the weight of worry settling like a stone. False alarms become a citywide epidemic of their own. Someone wakes with dry eyes because the night air was smoky, and by noon they are convinced blindness is imminent. Another climbs the stairs too quickly, feels winded, and immediately imagines themselves being carried to a burial pit before sunrise. A woman working in her kitchen feels flushed from the heat of the fire and sits down abruptly, overwhelmed by the possibility that fever has arrived. The line between symptom and imagination erodes until the two become nearly interchangeable. These moments of uncertainty can lead to swift, sometimes irrational decisions. Panic rarely waits for confirmation. A man feeling suddenly warm throws every window in his house open, convinced fresh air will save him, even if doing so invites his neighbour's suspicion. A mother, frightened by her daughter's brief cough, ushers her into a corner of the house, and insists she remain wrapped in blankets for hours, despite the child's protest that the cough was simply from laughing too hard earlier. A shopkeeper, unsettled by a momentary chill, abruptly closes his stall midday, leaving customers bewildered but sympathetic. Self-isolation, too, becomes a common reaction, though few do it with confidence. People shut themselves in rooms for hours or even days, despite having no certainty they are infected. A man sits alone in his attic, pacing slowly, waiting for his body to reveal its intentions. A woman moves into a small storage area behind her kitchen, insisting her family slide bread through a gap under the door, just in case. In many households, one room becomes the unofficial panic room, its occupants cycling through depending on who feels unwell that morning. Sometimes entire families participate in group caution. If one member experiences even mild discomfort, the rest retreat to separate corners of the house, speaking through door cracks and leaving mugs of water in hallways like peace offerings. Yeah, homes become fragmented, as though the plague can be outmaneuvered by strategic placement of furniture and whispered communication. The problem is that the human body is not a well-behaved machine. It produces ordinary discomforts with no respect for timing. A sneeze from dust-laden bedding sends someone into a spiral. A stomachache from undercooked food inspires frantic prayer. Even the simple fatigue of carrying water up several flights of stairs can spark a full existential crisis. People begin to interpret their bodies with the intensity of scholars studying rare manuscripts, except this manuscript rarely provides clarity and often delivers contradictions. The emotional toll becomes especially acute at night, when silence amplifies every sensation. Darkness brings a heightened awareness of one's breathing, pulse, and temperature. Yes, someone lying in bed may feel momentarily overheated beneath too many blankets, and before they can adjust their bedding, panic seizes them. This is it. Fever. Sleep, already fragile, is disrupted by these alarms. A person may wake repeatedly, touching their forehead, pressing a hand to their chest, or sitting upright to ensure they can still breathe comfortably. Families grow accustomed to sudden shouts or hurried footsteps in the night as someone jolts awake convinced their symptoms have begun. In some homes, people take turns monitoring one another, spouses glancing sideways in the dark to ensure the other is still breathing steadily. Nighttime becomes a vigil, a waiting room where no one knows what announcement will come at dawn, and yet most of these alarms amount to nothing. London becomes a city full of people who think they are dying at least twice a week. The body's usual complaints, previously shrugged off as inconveniences, now become accusations. A headache isn't just tension, it's a prophecy. A sore throat isn't dryness, it's danger announcing itself with a whisper. Even sweating becomes ambiguous. Is it fever, fear, or the result of being layered in wool during midsummer? Good luck distinguishing. What makes this ambiguity especially cruel is the knowledge that real symptoms, when they do begin, often start subtly. People know this, even if they do not fully understand the mechanics of disease. They know that yesterday's mild discomfort might become tomorrow's escalation. They know the lines between health and illness blur long before they break. And so every minor sensation feels weighted with potential, a seed that could grow into disaster. This constant hypervigilance drains the city's spirit. People walk more slowly, not only to conserve energy, but to observe themselves more carefully. They sit with hands folded against their chests, monitoring breaths like watchmen guarding the gates of their own lungs. They become historians of their own discomforts, mentally cataloguing each twinge, each tickle, each flutter. The mind, hoping to protect the body, instead exhausts it. And still, life continues. People must work, eat, care for children, fetch water, and navigate streets. They must interact with others even when doing so terrifies them. And every task carries the background question. Was that sensation normal? This constant, quiet distress weaves itself into the rhythm of the city, making survival a mental challenge as much as a physical one. Yet while individuals battle uncertainty privately, London as a whole grapples with another dilemma: how to keep essential work functioning when every job, from water carriers to gravediggers to shopkeepers, now carries risk. Soon, your steps will take you toward the strained workforce holding the city together, those who must continue working even when the city itself seems to be unravelling. By the summer of 1665, London feels like a city held together by rules, proclamations tacked to church doors, orders shouted by constables, reminders whispered in marketplaces. The government bans gatherings of every kind. No plays, no bear baiting, no music in the streets, no crowds at taverns, no public entertainments of any sort. Anything that draws people together is considered dangerous. Anything that encourages laughter, leisure, or distraction is viewed with suspicion. The logic is clear enough. The plague thrives on human closeness. If people stay apart, perhaps the sickness will find fewer hosts. But logic does not erase loneliness. It does not quiet boredom. It does not solve the human ache for company, conversation, and the comfort of familiar faces. And so, while London outwardly obeys a strict list of prohibitions, beneath the surface flourishes an entire second life, a quiet, subtle network of broken rules that people follow not out of rebellion, but out of the deeper need to feel human in a time that makes humanity difficult. Theatres, officially shuttered, do not entirely cease to exist. Actors who once performed before hundreds now whisper lines in cramped rooms, sharing their craft with small, secret gatherings of friends or patrons. The performances are brief, subdued, always at risk of interruption. A knock at the door sends everyone into a silent flurry, hiding costumes under blankets or pretending to be an ordinary household sharing an evening meal. There are no applause lines anymore, just grateful nods and the tense thrill of remembering what it feels like to be entertained. Bear-baiting pits stand empty, their arenas silent, yet groups of men gather in alleys near the Thames to discuss the sport with the reverence usually reserved for religious matters. They reenact past matches verbally, boasting about great bears and famous dogs, debating outcomes the way some people debate scripture. The ban has turned memory into pastime, but on certain nights, whispers circulate that a few reckless individuals hold illegal contests outside the city, far from authorities, far from watchful neighbours. Whether these stories are true hardly matters. The rumour alone reveals how some people cling to fragments of the life they once knew. Ballad singing, once the soundtrack of London streets, now slips into hidden corners. The city has banned singing in public places, insisting that crowds gathering around performers risk spreading plague. But music, stubborn as ever, refuses to disappear. Singers perform quietly in back rooms, offering soft renditions of popular songs to those who gather in twos or threes. Laughter, though stifled, still bubbles up in these rooms, muted joy shared carefully like contraband. Even ordinary social visits become covert operations. Friends who once called upon one another openly now invent elaborate strategies to disguise their meetings. A person might leave their home carrying a basket of fruit or a bundle of herbs, pretending to run errands while actually heading toward a neighbour's back door. Others slip through alleys at dusk, hoping the dim light will protect them from curious glances. In many parishes, people develop improvised signals: 2 knocks for friend, 3 knocks for stranger, a certain whistle to indicate the street is clear. These small rebellions are performed quietly, without bravado, as necessary acts of emotional survival. Inside homes, gatherings shrink to the smallest possible form. A pair of families might share a meal behind drawn curtains, each speaking in hushed tones lest someone walking outside hear too many voices. A few young people meet under the guise of sharing supplies, though they end up sharing stories instead. These gatherings are never elaborate or carefree. They are brief, cautious, and tinged with guilt. But they remind people that the world has not vanished entirely, that they still have connections, that humans can remain humans even under the shadow of plague. The rules banning entertainment and gatherings exist for good reason, but their enforcement varies. Some constables enforce the restrictions rigidly, patrolling for loud voices or suspicious gatherings. Others turn a blind eye, partly because they understand the emotional toll on their neighbours, and partly because they themselves occasionally slip into a back room to share a drink with a trusted friend. Officially, everyone must comply. Unofficially, everyone negotiates. The moral question of breaking these rules becomes a quiet, ongoing tension in households across the city. People weigh loneliness against risk, affection against caution. A mother decides whether to let her daughter visit a friend just this once. A young man debates attending a small gathering after hearing music drifting from a neighbour's window. A widow wonders whether sharing tea with the woman across the street is careless or life-saving. Breaking rules is never frivolous. It is measured, deliberate, infused with the awareness that one mistake could invite catastrophe. Even the government seems aware at some level that these rules stretch human nature to its limits. Their proclamations speak sternly of obedience but rarely describe punishments with the same detail. It is as though they know the public must behave, but also that absolute compliance is impossible. Underneath it all lies the unspoken truth. Humans are social creatures trapped in a landscape designed to make sociality dangerous. Interaction becomes an act of balancing longing with fear. And in a city where every choice carries weight, quiet resistance becomes a kind of shared understanding, even if no one speaks of it aloud. As you walk through the streets, you can feel this underground social life humming beneath the silence. A crack of light under a shuttered window, a sudden burst of laughter quickly smothered, two figures exchanging hurried words at a corner before parting ways. These are the signals of a world refusing to disappear entirely. And soon, your walk will take you toward another aspect of survival, a realm where society's balance between obedience and necessity becomes even more precarious, the world of work, where some must continue at any cost and others are forbidden to labour at all. As the sun begins its slow descent, London undergoes a transformation more profound than any change daylight ever imposes. The city seems to exhale, long, low and uneasy, as if preparing itself for the rituals and fears reserved exclusively for night. In ordinary years, evening would bring lantern glow, tavern laughter, and the muddled sounds of neighbours calling to one another across narrow streets. In 1665, nightfall feels like the city tightening its own noose. The first signal of evening is the watchman's shift change. These men, who stand sentinel outside quarantined homes, adjust positions with the weary precision of men who perform more penance than duty. The day watch, eyes gritty from monotony, hands over responsibility to the night watch, who arrives already exhausted in spirit if not in body. The exchange is rarely formal. It's simply a nod, a muttered acknowledgement, a shifting of weight from one pair of tired legs to another. Night watchmen face the harder task. Darkness magnifies uncertainty. A quiet cough inside a sealed house sounds louder. A footstep in an alley becomes suspicious. The shadows cast by their lanterns distort everything, turning harmless objects into menacing outlines. They stand still for hours at a time, listening to the muffled noises behind boarded doors, whispers, weeping, the restless shifting of the sick, and occasionally a silence sharper than sound. What they guard is not just a household, but the city's fragile sense of containment. Meanwhile, as darkness deepens, the number of burials increases. Night is when most bodies are removed, carried away under cover of dim light, because the city cannot bear to confront its losses in full visibility. The burial grounds, by day sombre but orderly, come alive at night with grim efficiency. Gravediggers lift lanterns that flicker in the wind, their beams sweeping across uneven ground and half-dug pits. The men work steadily, driven by necessity rather than ritual. They don't speak much. Words feel out of place when surrounded by so much unacknowledged sorrow. The pits deepen as the night hours stretch on. Soil piles beside them in crude mounds. When a body arrives, wrapped, weighted, anonymous, the earth opens to receive it with unceremonious practicality. The flick of lantern light on canvas, the scrape of shovels, the dull thud of soil falling, these sounds weave together into a nocturnal rhythm the city never asked for but has come to accept. Even far from the burial grounds, night amplifies fear in ways daylight never could. In darkness, the imagination becomes a wide-open door. A simple gust rattling a shutter resembles someone knocking to confess symptoms. A cat darting across the street becomes a harbinger of misfortune. People retreat indoors long before the last glow of evening fades, dreading what moves in the hours when the living feel outnumbered by the dead. Windows close. Uncurtains draw. Candles flicker behind thicker walls of fabric than usual, as if light itself might attract misfortune. Households gather closely, speaking in low voices, worried that even laughter, rare as it is, might sound inappropriate in a city where darkness signals work for the death cart. The streets empty so completely that even the slight sound of your own footsteps feels inappropriate, too loud, too conspicuous. The horizon of houses appears as an unbroken silhouette, punctuated only by the faint glow of a watchman's lantern or the far-off bobbing of a torch carried by burial attendants. The emptiness creates a strange sensation. The city feels both too large and too small. Too large because its emptiness suggests vastness. Too small because fear compresses every thought inward. The silence becomes oppressive. In daylight, Londoners can at least cling to the illusion of normalcy. Markets open, carts move, voices murmur. But once night settles, the city reveals what it has become. A place built, however unintentionally, for the enforcement of death control. Streets that were designed for commerce and crowds now serve as channels for the movement of watchmen, death carts, and silent fear. If you linger too long outside, the atmosphere seeps under your skin. The darkness feels heavier, as if infused with the collective dread of thousands of households. You begin to understand why children wake screaming from nightmares, why adults sit in silence long after finishing their evening meals, and why every family listens carefully for sounds that signal danger, or worse, sounds that signal nothing at all. The night teaches a harsh lesson. The plague does not sleep. It does not rest when the city rests. It moves through the absence of sound just as effectively as through the presence of breath. Nightfall reveals the truth everyone already knows deep down. Fear is not merely an emotion in London, it is an atmosphere, and yet the city endures the darkness because it must. Every sunrise still matters. Every morning offers a momentary reprieve, however fragile. But before dawn returns, the night must complete its grim cycle. The watchmen must endure exhaustion. The graves must be filled, and the quiet must settle over the streets like dust. As you continue forward, the heavy stillness of night gives way to another part of life reshaped by plague, one not marked by death carts or sealed doors, but by the economic desperation of a workforce forced to choose between earning wages and risking exposure. Soon, you will step into the world of labourers, apprentices and servants whose lives cannot pause, even when the city demands that everything else does. Night is supposed to offer relief, a boundary between one day's worries and the next, but in plague-stricken London, night becomes its own ordeal. Sleep, once a daily certainty, now feels like a gamble. The act of closing one's eyes carries a tension that no household escapes. Each family must decide how to sleep, together for comfort or apart for caution, though neither choice truly guarantees peace. Some families choose to sleep in the same room, believing closeness offers reassurance. Children curl beside parents, gripping them tightly, as if proximity itself can keep the plague from finding them. Adults sit awake longer than they admit, listening to the soft breathing of those they love and wondering if those breaths will sound the same by morning. In cramped houses, where several people share a single mattress or pallet, warmth and anxiety mingle in equal measure. A shift in blankets, a sigh in the dark, or the slightest cough can ripple through the room like a shock. Other families separate, each member choosing a corner or a different room entirely. They scatter not out of distance but out of fear, an instinct to reduce risk, even if the logic is imperfect. A mother may insist her son sleep near the window for fresh air, while she sleeps by the hearth, ears sharp for any unusual noise. A husband may take the lower floor to spare his family if he wakes feeling feverish. These separations create emotional gaps even within walls that cannot spare them. The silence between rooms becomes louder than conversation ever was. No matter the arrangement, sleep is fragile. Insomnia spreads almost as efficiently as rumour. People lie awake for hours, staring at ceilings, counting heartbeats, replaying the events of the day, or imagining the terrors of tomorrow. The stillness around them feels unnatural, charged with anticipation. Even the buildings themselves seem restless. Wooden beams creak, floorboards settle, rats scurry. The wind slips through cracks with unsettling sighs. These ordinary noises take on new meaning, feeding imaginations primed for catastrophe. Dreams, when they come, offer no escape. They twist anxieties into surreal forms, nightmares in which the red crosses grow larger, or watchmen appear in bedrooms, or familiar faces fade into shadows. Some dream of wandering empty streets that stretch on without end. Others relive moments they fear, the discovery of a bubo, the sound of a death cart, the hush that follows a neighbour's final breath. These dreams linger long after waking, clinging to the edges of consciousness like cobwebs that refuse to shake loose. Even pleasant dreams betray their sleepers. A person might dream of a feast only to wake hungry and frightened. Another dreams of loved ones laughing in a future free from sickness, then opens their eyes to silence and uncertainty. The contrast can be cruel. Dreams become reminders of the normal lives people once lived, and of how distant those lives now feel. Parents struggle especially with the nights. They lie awake listening for their children's breathing, counting the seconds between inhales, terrified of changes that might signal fever. They stretch their hands toward foreheads in the dark, feeling not only for warmth, but for reassurance. They never fully relax. Sleep, when it comes, feels like a collapse rather than a rest. Some households adopt small rituals to make night more bearable. A candle left burning low in a corner, a whispered prayer spoken together before bedding down, a pot of herbs set near the bed to scent the air with something that feels protective, a song hummed quietly to children who pretend they're braver than they feel. These rituals do not guarantee ease, but they create the illusion of control, an illusion many cling to desperately. There is also the unspoken fear shared across London, the possibility of not waking. Everyone knows someone who went to bed feeling a little off and never rose again. The unpredictability of the plague casts a shadow across every pillow. Even the healthiest must confront the thought that morning is not promised. This awareness shapes a peculiar tenderness. Families exchange soft good nights, linger before blowing out candles, hold hands an extra moment, uncertain whether this touch might be the last. The night air itself becomes a character in the household drama. It flows through cracks and under doors, carrying sounds and scents that unsettle nerves already frayed by daylight's tension. Sometimes the faint roll of a late-night cart echoes down the street, and people freeze, listening. Sometimes the distant barking of a dog stirs a new round of worry. Even a strong gust of wind rattling the shutters can jolt the entire household awake, pulses racing. For those who do manage to sleep deeply, our waking carries its own dread. The moment of awareness, the first breath, the first stretch, comes with a subdued question: how do I feel? And just like that, the cycle of vigilance begins again. Relief is momentary. Uncertainty returns swiftly. What London learns in these nights is that fear, when sustained long enough, becomes part of the body's rhythm. It shapes breathing, posture, dreams, and the fragile boundary between rest and waking. Morning offers light, but not certainty. Evening offers quiet, but never safety. Still, households continue to endure the long nights, one after another. They adapt in small ways. They brace themselves for darkness. They whisper to one another in the quiet hours. They remind themselves that even fear cannot last forever, not at the same intensity, not with the same bite. Humans have a way of surviving even the nights that feel endless, and as the city strains under these endless cycles of dusk and dawn, your path soon leads beyond household walls to the physical reality shaping this fear. London's overcrowded spaces, narrow alleys, and cramped homes where the plague spreads with ruthless ease. Eventually something strange happens in plague-stricken London. Not a return to normal, not a sense of safety, but a rhythm. Not a comforting rhythm, but one that forms out of necessity, repetition, and the simple reality that life, stubborn as ever, continues even when the world feels unrecognizable. Survival becomes a routine, and routine becomes a kind of numbness, an emotional callus thickened by too many days that look the same. It begins each morning, not with anticipation, but with resignation. People rise because they must, not because they expect the day to offer anything different. The question is no longer, what will happen today, but can I do today again? The days themselves blend, not through monotony of activity, but through monotony of fear. There is always the same careful opening of the door, the same cautious walk to the market, the same measured interactions, the same effort to breathe shallowly near strangers. Even checking for symptoms becomes a ritual so ingrained that the body performs it automatically before the mind fully wakes. Small tasks, fetching water, sweeping rooms, preparing meals, once carried the simplicity of everyday living. Now, they are survival mechanics. Each action serves a single purpose: continued existence. Flour must be stretched into multiple meals. Water must be fetched early to avoid meeting others at the pump. Herbs must be burned or hung or crushed because habit insists they help, even if understanding is absent. After weeks of repetition, danger paradoxically becomes familiar. Not safe, never safe, but familiar. People learn exactly how far to stand from one another. They learn which streets are usually empty, which cellars speak the least, which neighbours keep distance and which do not. They know the time of day when the streets fall quiet and the hour when the death cart usually begins its rounds, and they adjust their routines accordingly, the way a sailor adjusts sails to match the tide. But familiarity is not comfort. It dulls the edges of fear without removing its weight. Emotional numbness creeps in quietly, unnoticed at first. A neighbour dies, and people murmur condolences automatically, the same way they ask about the weather. When bodies are removed at night, fewer silhouettes appear at windows. The sound still chills, but not with the intensity it once held. Even the red crosses, once gut-wrenching signs, gradually blend into the landscape like wartime posters nobody reads anymore. They're still terrible, but the mind stops flinching to conserve energy. This numbness is not indifference, it is survival. The human mind cannot sustain heightened terror indefinitely. It dulls itself to endure. Families move through their routines with the quiet determination of people pushing through a thick fog. There is no elation in completing a day without symptoms. There is only a muted acknowledgement. We did it again. Conversations shrink. People stop making future plans. There is no point imagining next month when tomorrow feels precarious. Jokes exist, but they are brittle things, shared sparingly, like rationed sugar. And even these attempts at levity carry an undertone of exhaustion, as though humour itself has grown tired. The city's emotional vocabulary contracts. Everything becomes either necessity or burden. Children, once noisy in the streets, learn silence. Adults who used to argue about prices or politics now argue about nothing at all. Most disagreements dissolve before they form. No one has the energy. Emotional expression fades. People hold grief without tears, fear without panic, hope without enthusiasm. Numbness becomes the city's unofficial temperament. Even food loses meaning. Meals are functional, rarely pleasurable, and bread tastes like the absence of hunger rather than its satisfaction. Water refreshes the body but not the spirit. People chew because the body requires it, not because the meal offers comfort. A full stomach no longer represents security. It merely marks another day endured. And yet, the repetition offers something surprisingly stabilizing. Predictability, even in danger, becomes a kind of anchor. People know how to move through their day without falling apart. They know which tasks to do first, how to pace themselves, where to avoid going. No one feels safe, but many feel practiced. What changes most profoundly is the way people understand time. Hours feel slow, but weeks disappear quickly. The days blur into one another, marked only by faint variations. The weather, the market stock, the sound of a neighbour coughing, the distant ring of church bells announcing another burial. Time becomes elastic, stretched thin across routines that rarely shift, and beneath it all lies exhaustion, not the sharp exhaustion of effort, but the deep, quiet exhaustion of enduring too much without relief. Sleep offers minimal recovery. Prayer offers uncertain comfort. The daylight offers no reassurance. People keep moving forward not out of optimism but out of habit. Still, the city persists. The numbness, though heavy, has a strange effect. It keeps people functioning. They survive not through inspiration, but through repetition. Each completed day becomes proof that the next might be endured as well. Yet even numbness cannot stop the brutal reality that the plague eventually forces households to collapse their routines entirely. Because when sickness does enter a home, when the first undeniable symptoms appear, the repetition shatters. Life transitions instantly from maintaining survival to managing crisis, and soon your steps will lead to that threshold. The moment sickness arrives, the frantic adjustments that follow, and the heartbreaking speed with which the plague transforms one household's routine into chaos. There comes a moment, quiet, almost anticlimactic, when the bills of mortality begin to show fewer deaths. Not a miraculous plunge, not a triumphant return to normalcy, but a subtle shift in the columns of printed numbers. 1 week records fewer burials than the week before. The next week follows the same pattern. Slowly, the line turns downward. After months of relentless ascent, London finally sees the first hints of retreat. Word spreads, but not with celebration. Londoners have learned caution the hard way. People study the bills with narrowed eyes, lingering over each parish name as though searching for hidden tricks. Some trace the columns with trembling fingers, afraid to trust what they see. Decline feels too much like hope, and hope has become a dangerous emotion, too sharp for a city already rubbed raw. No one rushes into the streets cheering. There are no bells rung for relief. If anything, the new numbers unsettle people. The city has been conditioned to expect only worsening news. Improvement disrupts the rhythm of fear that has become second nature. Neighbours meet the new figures with uncertain glances. "It's too soon," some murmur. "They must be mistaken." Others whisper that perhaps searchers have grown careless, tired of their grim task. Or perhaps families have begun burying their dead quietly to avoid stigma. Suspicion lingers even in the face of good news. The truth is simpler. The plague is slowing. But belief does not come easily. The streets certainly do not refill overnight. Even with fewer deaths, the habits formed over long months remain entrenched. People continue walking with wide gaps between them. They avoid touching walls or door frames. They still stop speaking abruptly when someone nearby coughs, even if it's clearly from cold air or dust. The muscle memory of fear is strong. It does not loosen its grip merely because the weekly tallies say it should. Shops that survive the worst months open cautiously, some only for brief hours in the morning. Their owners stand behind counters with the same guarded expressions they wore at the height of the plague. Customers hover at thresholds, uncomfortable stepping inside. The flow of commerce resumes in thin, hesitant trickles rather than floods. A few stalls return to the marketplace, but there are still wide empty spaces where familiar sellers once stood. Absence hangs heavier than presence. Some households begin to let themselves believe recovery is possible, but not publicly. Hopes are spoken in soft tones, often accompanied by a nervous laugh, as if admitting optimism aloud might tempt fate. A mother glances at her children and whispers, "If it keeps falling, perhaps we'll see your cousins in spring." A husband nods and says, "Let's wait for another bill before we think about church." Hope is rationed now, like flour or coal. Even the noises of the city reflect the lingering caution. Fewer death carts rumble through the night, and their absence feels strangely disorienting. For months their wheels were part of London's nightly rhythm, a horrifying rhythm, but predictable. Now, when night falls, the silence sounds unfamiliar. Some people lie awake listening for carts that never arrive, unable to sleep in the absence of the noise they once dreaded. Yet the city is not eager to call this safety. Every household knows someone who died suddenly, someone whose symptoms appeared out of nowhere. The plague's unpredictability has taught London not to trust positive signs. What if the decline is temporary? What if winter brings resurgence? What if the next week's numbers rise again? These questions hover in every conversation, unspoken but deeply felt. The decline, paradoxically, creates new anxieties. People have grown accustomed to the routines of danger, and now they face the uncertainty of transition. Should they resume work? Is it safe to visit neighbours? When can children play outside again? These decisions feel too heavy for individuals to make, yet no official proclamation arrives confidently declaring the danger over. Everything remains suspended, as if the city is waiting for someone to grant permission to breathe normally again. Some of the wealthy begin trickling back into London, though cautiously and often without fanfare. Their return is met with mixed reactions: resentment from those who endured the worst, relief from businesses eager for their coin. But even their presence does not restore the vibrancy of the city. They stay indoors, maintain distance, and avoid crowded streets just as everyone else does. No one wants to be the first to resume normal life. The risk feels too personal. Church bells, which once marked burials with numbing regularity, begin to ring less frequently. The sound still carries a solemn weight, but now it stands out instead of blending into the city's daily soundtrack. Every reduced toll feels like a cautious, unspoken blessing. Still, congregations remain small. Clergy preach to half-empty pews, their sermons echoing through spaces that once felt cramped. Faith persists, but fellowship has thinned. Even as the numbers fall, the psychological residue of the plague clings stubbornly. People continue to check their bodies for symptoms. They continue to watch their neighbours out of the corner of their eyes. They continue to walk past the red-marked doors, even faded ones, with the same instinctive shudder. Healing, London learns, does not happen with the same speed as infection. Decline in mortality is measurable. Decline in fear is not. And yet, beneath all the caution, something subtle does begin to shift. A child laughs loudly in the street and no one hushes them. A shopkeeper leaves his stall open a little longer than usual. A neighbour waves, properly waves, without looking immediately over their shoulder. These gestures are small, almost fragile, but they carry the first hints of recovery. Still, London does not trust the progress fully. Not yet. Not after everything. The city stands in a liminal space, no longer drowning, not yet swimming freely. And this is where you find yourself as the year winds down, in a city learning slowly and uncertainly that survival does not end with the fall of numbers. It continues into the long, a complicated process of rebuilding life after loss. In this struggle, the final chapter awaits, the reckoning of what it means to have lived through a year defined by fear, endurance, and the quiet astonishment of still being alive. By the time daylight breaks on the day you've just survived, one ordinary, extraordinary day in plague-stricken London, you begin to understand that endurance here is not the same as living. It is a kind of uneasy art, shaped not by triumph, but by adjustment. Survival requires bending yourself into shapes you never intended to take. Cautious, alert, emotionally spare, and willing to accept that fear is no longer an occasional visitor, but a permanent lodger. And so, the good news? You survived a day in plague-stricken London. The bad news? You did it by learning not to trust silent strangers, or your own body. Yeah, compliance becomes your closest companion. Not enthusiastic compliance, not the confident obedience of someone who believes entirely in what they've been told, but the weary, practical kind. You follow the rules because they are the only structure left in a city where control has otherwise evaporated. You avoid gatherings, keep distance even when desperately lonely, and hold your breath as you pass marked houses. You move through streets like a shadow, trying not to disturb the world around you. No one forces you to be this cautious. Life itself persuades you gently, repeatedly, relentlessly. Silence also shapes your survival. Not peaceful silence, but the heavy kind that presses against the city like fog. You learn that when nothing is happening, something is probably happening somewhere else. Silence means the night has settled. It means neighbours are waiting behind their doors, listening for signs they hope will never come. It means watchmen have taken their posts and the death cart may soon begin its distant roll. It is a silence filled with potential, each minute stretched thin with the tension of the unknown. You do not trust this silence, but you learn to live with it. It becomes part of your internal landscape, a sound you feel rather than hear. You measure its shifts, its tones. You know the difference between a quiet street that is safe and a quiet street that is holding its breath. Strangers, too, reshape themselves in your mind. You don't dislike them. You simply don't believe in them anymore, not in the old way. A stranger was once merely a person you didn't know. Now a stranger is a variable in a dangerous equation. You give wide berth. You avoid eye contact. You sidestep even those who seem perfectly well, because seeming well means nothing. Danger is invisible, and invisibility has turned everyone into a possible threat. And perhaps the strangest betrayal of all is the betrayal of your own body. You once trusted it, at least enough to go about your day without questioning every breath and sensation. But now, your body feels like a storyteller, whose tales grow more alarming every hour. A cough, a shiver, a moment of dizziness. These were once mundane. Now they feel like warnings carved into your skin. You learn to doubt yourself, which is a peculiar way to survive, but it keeps you alert enough to notice genuine danger when it comes. Survival then becomes a cycle of negotiations between caution and movement, hunger and fear, routine and dread. You learn to pace your emotions, conserving them as carefully as you conserve supplies. Even joy feels rationed. You might smile at a child playing quietly indoors or at the brief warmth of sun through the window, but you never let the smile stretch too wide. Happiness feels risky, as though hope might tempt misfortune. And yet, woven into this weary endurance is a subtle, stubborn resilience. You do not celebrate your survival, but you acknowledge it. You adapt, not because you want to, but because adaptation is the only path forward. You learn new ways of moving, thinking, interacting. You begin to understand that fear can sit beside you without overwhelming you entirely. You discover that even in a city hollowed by sickness, you can find small rhythms that stabilize you. The psychological cost, however, accumulates in places you cannot see. Every decision not to touch a surface, every moment of hesitation before stepping outside, every sideways glance at a neighbour chips away at your internal foundation. Long after the numbers fall, long after the plague recedes, long after the streets refill and markets feel lively again, this residue remains. You carry it quietly, tucked beneath newer routines, ready to surface when a cough echoes too sharply, or when silence stretches too long. The city itself will recover faster than the people. Streets can be swept, crosses can fade, houses can reopen. But minds and habits do not shed fear as quickly as paint flakes off a sealed door. The survival skills you learned, hypervigilance, suspicion, emotional restraint, linger like old scars, visible only when pressed. And yet, despite all of this, you reached the end of the day, not gracefully perhaps and not boldly, but you reached it. You navigated danger through instinct, caution, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. You endured the heaviness of night, the precariousness of morning, the tension of every hour in between. You survived not by conquering the plague, but by outlasting its demands for one more day. This is what it means to survive in London during the Great Plague. Not victory, not clarity, not peace. Simply endurance stitched together moment by moment. The good news? You made it through. The bad news? Tomorrow asks you to do it all over again.